Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Finance Committee. Today is the 30th of September, and we've got a fairly full agenda. Can I firstly just welcome Claire Moriarty. Claire, thank you very much for joining. We're delighted that you have joined us. We've got a fair bit to get through today, so what we're going to do is that we've had several papers that have been issued and hopefully have been seen on the website. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check that we've got a quorum. Can I get confirmation that we've got a quorum, please?
Yes, all members of the committee are here.
Excellent, thank you. So what I would like to suggest is that I want to remind everybody that the meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and we do have important things that we're going to be discussing as part 2 of the agenda, and during that part that will not be a part that will be privy for the public. However, we'll come back for public consumption if there's anything that's noteworthy on the back of that. So I suggest that we go straight into the meeting, if we may, please. So in terms of apologies for absence, is there anything that anyone wants to pick up in terms of any apologies that we've received?
Chair, there are no apologies for absence. All members of the committee are present on the call.
Thank you. Okay. I also want to just make a comment that in addition to the fact that we've got Claire, we've also got the fact that this is the last Finance Committee meeting for Tanya Koff before she leaves TfL to join the Restoration and Renewal Delivery Authority. So can I just say that on behalf of all members of the committee, I'd like to thank Tanya for her significant contribution, not just to the Finance Committee over the years, but importantly to TfL. So that's an important thing. Tanya, thank you, and we wish you lots of success.
Thank you very much, Chair.
So the meeting's being held using Teams, and we're going to be, as I said, we're going to be broadcasting on YouTube. So please, can I ask everybody to speak clearly when presenting items and joining the discussions? And if possible, please keep your microphones on mute. It'll just become a lot easier in terms of that. In terms of safety, I do want to make the point that we make at every meeting on TfL, which is safety is paramount at TfL. And if members have any safety issues to raise in relation to any of the items we've got on the agenda or within the remit of the committee, then please either let me know at the start of the item or under any matters arising. And if there are any other safety issues, then please, again, feel free to raise them now or discuss them with Howard Carter, or the appropriate member of the Executive Committee after the meeting. So on the basis that we're moving ahead, let's move to item 2, declaration of interests. Howard?
Chair, just to confirm that all declarations of interest that we have from members are up to date on the website. I'm not aware of anything specific in relation to items on this agenda. Those as we get those items at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Howard. So moving to the minutes of the meeting, which were held on the 24th of June. Can I ask if there's any comments on accuracy from anyone before I approve them? I'll just wait for a moment, and if there is anything, please do let me know. Okay, so I will take silence as that there's nothing that anyone wants to make a note of. So we will approve the minutes of the meetings held on the 24th. I will sign them, Howard. We'll find a way to do that.
Thank you.
Let's move on to item 4, please. Matters arising and the action list, which is on pages 9 to 12 in the documents that have been distributed. Howard.
Chair, thank you. Yes, you have the update as to where we are with actions from the committee. I wasn't particularly planning to say anything about any of those, but obviously if there is anything that anybody wants to ask a question about or raise, please feel free to do so.
Thank you, Howard. I think relatively straightforward, so no one's been informed of any issues. I think it's pretty straight. Moving on to item 5, please. This is the decision making during the emergency measures in terms of COVID and the use of delegated authority. Howard, again, I'm going to ask you if you want to update on that.
Thank you. Yes, Chair. So just two things, if I may. One is on the general position in relation to decision making. As you know, we were taking decisions through virtual meeting, through Chair's action, because TfL didn't have the benefit of some of the changes that had been made to local authority meeting arrangements to allow them to be held virtually. I'm pleased to say that change has now been made. TfL is a body that's entitled to take advantage of those provisions and legally hold meetings virtually. In order to do that in compliance with the regulations, we have to live stream the meetings. So this meeting is, as you've already said, being live streamed, and we're therefore compliant, and the committee is able to take decisions as a committee as we go through the agenda. And then just in terms of use of delegated authority, Chair, obviously you've got the paper which records in particular the London Cleaner Vehicle Support Scrappage Scheme and the direction made by the Mayor. The other authorities are as set out in the paper, but could I just apologise and say there are a couple of land authorities that were missed out and should also have been mentioned. So I'll just mention those, though we can record them. We should also have recorded a land authority of 14.5 million relating to a land swap around Southwark Station, and a land authority of 6.95 million for the sale of property and station development costs at Hounslow West. Apart from that, as far as I'm aware, the other matters set out in the paper are accurate, and I just invite you to note them.
Thank you, Howard. Any comments from anybody in terms of that? Howard, can I just ask for clarity? Why was that the case in terms of, was it just missed out?
I think they just came through late. So I think it's a timing issue as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
I will just make sure, though, I take the point that you're no doubt thinking, we will just make sure that the system's foolproof, but I believe it is.
Okay. All right, fine. Thank you. All right, on that basis, we will note the paper. Thanks, Howard. Okay, we're going to move on to item 6, please, which is the finance report. Tony, I believe you're going to be leading us through this.
Yeah, I'll make an introduction, Chair, and then TfL's head of FP&A, Raj Sachdeva, will take us through some of the detail of the operating account and capital account. So maybe just to start, a reminder that the P5 results, which run to the 22nd of August, are now aligned to the revised budget, which was approved by the board on the 29th of July. So we've moved away from the emergency budget that was set in April to the revised budget. Just a few points to note on that. From a revenue perspective, the revised budget includes a second spike of the pandemic in the winter of 2021, and obviously an impact on revenue around that. And Raj will pick up on that as part of his report in terms of the forward look. Secondly, it has quite an emphasis on tightening of cost and commitments, both from an FTE, discretionary spend, but also deferring costs where we can to minimise our cash draw during these difficult time periods. And the third thing to note is that it incorporates the governmental requirements that were included in the H1 funding agreement around particularly services and operating services for longer, i.e., for example, the congestion zone. So they have all been embedded into here, and the comparators that Raj will talk against are now against that revised budget. So Raj, maybe I can ask you to just pick up on a summary of the results for P5.
Thank you, Tony, and good morning, everyone. If we could just move to slide 3. And just as a reminder, so whereas previously we've been comparing to the emergency budget, as Tony mentioned, we've now updated the comparator to the revised budget, which was approved on the 29th of July 2020 versus the previously approved, which was back in April. So it's a more meaningful comparison, and that's what we'll be taking you through now. So I'm going to go to slide 6, which has the main financial details. So overall, the net cost of operations is a deficit of 692 million, an improvement on revised budget by 115 million. Passenger and other operating income is 46 million better than revised budget, which along with additional furloughing grant of 13 million equates to about half of the overall improvement. The passenger and other operating income improvement is driven predominantly by passenger journeys compared to budget and also additional road user charging income. Core operating costs of around 51 million better than revised budget, with around half of this being a phasing benefit for an earlier than budgeted supplier settlement. Capital renewals are at 84 million, which is 5 million below budget and 50 million lower than prior year. Headcount is now at 608 FTE lower than at the end of 2019-20, with around 3,725 staff still on furlough. Cost reductions have been seen across all business units, which reflects the additional cost and commitment control measures that have been instituted. Tony will come back to this a little bit later. On a quick forward look, costs are expected to remain under control with a continued focus on headcount and also on the coronavirus related costs to ensure we remain in line with latest government advice on safety and social distancing. The revised budget assumes a second spike from mid-December to early Feb, which is periods 10 and 11, which sees passenger volumes almost dropping to the levels seen in May, June, when tube journeys were approximately 90% down on prior year demand at the peak. However, whilst tube passenger volumes have been 2% higher than revised budget up to P5 and bus volumes around 11% higher, we're now starting to see a stalling in a previously improving trend since government announced the new restrictions in September. It's increasingly likely we'll enter a second spike earlier than assumed in the revised budget, which could see passenger volumes reduced from budgeted levels of 70% down on last year to around the 80 to 85% reduction levels. Whilst the revised budget did include a contingency in half one to cover revenue uncertainties, this contingency will now be required to help mitigate the impacts of an earlier, more prolonged second spike in half two, which could see half two passenger revenues reduced from the current revised budget of 680 million by a 1 to 200 million reduction. This compares to half one expected revenues of 800 million, bearing in mind half one has 7 periods compared to 6 in half two. So if we could go to slide 11. So just to recap over on the capital investment, overall new capital investment is at 249 million, which is in line with budget, although there have been a number of plus and minuses, which can be seen on the following slide. Compared to this time last year, renewal spend in TfL is 50 million lower, and capital investment is 135 million lower, which is based upon the reductions that we've been implementing through the first half of the year. Crossrail is also at 132 million lower than budget. Sorry, than last year. Work on Crossrail has now accelerated and is now 19 million higher than budget. Work is being undertaken on COVID-19 impacts of the investment projects and will be discussed at the Programmes and Investment Committee in October 2020. Just move forward to slide 13. As a reminder, we retain minimum cash of 1.2 billion, which is shown by the red dotted line, and this represents 2 months of expenditure. P5 cash balance at period end was 1,584 million, an improvement on budget of 21 million. This is 470 million lower than at the end of prior year, where we had a balance of 2,045 million. That balance in itself was 200 million lower due to COVID impacts felt in March. Total COVID cash impacts have been closer to 1.7 billion after adjusting for the government grant support. Tony, can I hand back to you to talk about control measures?
Sure, thank you, Raj. So maybe I could cover off some of the steps that we've taken around spend and commitment control measures as part of our response to the COVID pandemic. But before that, maybe just a reminder that since 2015, TfL has been on a significant transformation journey where significant amount of cost has already been taken out of the activities and some additional revenue created through some of our commercial activities. And we were expecting to reach for 1920 pre-COVID a small operating deficit of about £200 million. This is an improvement compared to 2015 of somewhere around £1 billion. So significant work's been done over the last 4 to 5 years in reducing costs, but also in maximising and leveraging our assets to create revenue. So a lot of work already being done, but some of the steps that we've taken since the pandemic in terms of control measures have been headcount freeze for all non-permanent labour except for critical roles. And as you heard earlier, we've had a reduction of non-permanent labour of about 442 FTEs. The same's applied for our own headcount and permanent staff, again, except for critical roles, going through both MD and HR director approvals. And we've seen a reduction from year end of about 166 FTEs. We have continued to use the furloughing scheme. Originally, it was intended to the end of July, but we will see some additional income coming in the periods to the end of October around the extension of the furlough scheme. Early on in the process, Simon drove the creation of the Finance Commitment Oversight Group, which meets weekly and is the CFO and the executive team who oversee all financial commitments and spend. This has been operating since the middle of June and reviews all spend above 1 million or lower down to about 100,000 from budgeted items, and also restart of projects. So quite a tight rein. A weekly submission routine has been implemented in order to provide that visibility of what's being spent and challenge the spend across the organisation. Some other spend control initiatives are looking currently at financial approval levels and are they appropriate in these times? And we've got some of our systems teams, commercial teams and finance teams looking at that. We're looking at the reporting of commitments by cost centre and ensuring that there's visibility of that through to the Financial Commitment Oversight Group. We're breaking down our commitments as much as we can. So many of our POs, where appropriate, are breaking down by quarter and reviewing the spend in the previous quarter before issuing the next quarter's spend. So really tightening what we're spending and not leaving the ability to flex out in the business. And several other measures in terms of control. Simon has also written out to the business just in terms of the managing of our cash and commitments and the importance of this. And we've put a real emphasis, particularly over the last 3 or 4 months, on our cash flow planning and cash flow planning accuracy, with a greater rigour around our divisional reviews, ensuring that we ensure that we have a tight understanding of commitments and their link into the cash flows. So there's some of the steps that we've taken over the last few months in order to ensure tightening of spend and commitment controls across the TfL entities. And at that point, I'd stop, Chair, and any questions, comments.
Chair, just before we move to questions, perhaps I could just add one piece of context around the renewals, because clearly the renewals we undertake are critical to the safety and reliability of our operations. The reason why in H1 renewals were 50 million lower than the prior year was for a large part of H1 we were running less than our full service patterns, and therefore we were able to save some cash by deferring some renewals to the second half of this year. With the requirement to run full services from the funding agreement and reaching that level from May, early June onwards, we will have to increase critical capital renewals for the second half of the year, which was fully reflected in the revised budget. And these have to be undertaken. They must be funded if we're to safely run full services for the remainder of this year and into next.
Thank you, Simon, for that. Okay, let me open it up to members of the committee in terms of questions, please. Ben first, and then Anne.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, congratulations in terms of all the hard work, in terms of really reining in spending. I guess just as a point there, just as an observation, I'm sure in actual fact we've learned quite a few things, and we've put in some tighter controls. I think it'll be interesting to see those actually thinking about which ones of those we want to kind of keep running beyond this, just in terms of some new learning, some new systems, a new culture. Because I think that's just another. There could be some real goodness there, Tony and team. And so I think it's really worth just at some stage reflecting on what we've done and what we've learned, and what we want to continue doing as a general kind of policy. So that's, I guess, a comment. I'd be interested to know, we brought in, I believe, someone to kind of really help drive procurement. And I'd be interested to know whether that appointment has been successful and kind of central to this initiative, because we made quite a big point about that, about trying to focus on procurement before COVID hit us. So I'd be interested to know whether that appointment has actually been, how that's working out. And then just as a final point, and this comes on from what you've just mentioned, Simon, as you know, a number of us were quite concerned about the surface policy in terms of, if you like, holding back on renewals for roads for a while. And we'd typically had a kind of a standard renewal program, and we'd pulled back on that. And I know that this year we were really driving to kind of make sure that we kind of caught up and made sure that our roads were of a high quality standard, because they had degraded. And when I look at the capital expenditure, I do see still that we're now kind of a little bit behind in terms of surface transport expenditure. So I'd like to hear where we are on that, because that's always been, I think, a point of concern for a number of board members.
Thanks, Ben. Simon? You're on mute, Simon.
Apologies. Right, I'll pick up the first lot of questions, and then I might bring Tony in if we need some more detailed answers. So I think we have, to your first point about culture and controls, I think increasing the culture of value for money and the value of cash and liquidity in the organisation has been a big shift for us. The new executive overwatch we've put in on all financial commitment has really helped provide greater transparency across the executive of what goes on across the organisation. So I think that is something culturally that we will want to retain and improve on going forward. And we've also been working with Alison Munro as chair of IPAG, who has been working with us in our investment group and before PIC on how we improve our business case methodology and the value for money assessments in our capital programs and our business planning prioritization. So I think we are, through necessity, continuing to build upon the work we've done in terms of operating efficiency, to start to now also focus in terms of capital efficiency, and to really start to culturally recognise the need to at all times preserve our liquidity and to ensure that we're delivering value for money across everything that we do, recognising that many things we do don't generate a financial return, but they still need to be delivered in a value for money way. In terms of procurement and how our new Chief Procurement Officer, Jonathan Patrick, is doing, in his first 12 months, he has completely rebuilt the leadership team of the procurement and supply chain function that is now operating at a much higher level, and has taken some significant steps to create a central database and greater governance over commercial processes and controls, without which we wouldn't have been able to have implemented the Financial Commitment Oversight Group, because we're now actually able to stop expenditure from flowing through the organisation and into accounts payable, and to provide the visibility of that. And increasingly, Jonathan, as part of my senior leadership team, is acting as part of Andy's wider leadership team. And indeed, if either myself or Tony are unavailable due to funding negotiations, Jonathan now also chairs the Financial Commitment Oversight Group, which is a great enhancement in profile for the procurement and supply chain function. So he's proving a very valuable member of the team. We are continuing on our journey. It is going to take us a number of years to get that function to be operating in line with the best in class elsewhere, but we are making good progress. And I think Anne heard an update on that at the audit committee for the audit committee and our external auditors a few weeks ago. But we'd be happy, I think, in the next finance committee to give you a briefing on where we are and where we intend to go next with that procurement transformation. And then finally, on surface renewals, yes, absolutely. As you all know, pausing proactive renewals on the surface network for 2 years was an absolute feature of necessity due to the lack of long-term funding certainty that we've faced for the last couple of years. Our business plan saw us wanting to return to proactive road renewals this year, but the financial situation we found ourselves in H1 meant that pause was effectively continued into H2 this year. But the revised budget sets out the need to return to proactive road renewals, and we know from the Rotherhithe Tunnel and the A40 Westway and a number of our major structures just on our network, let alone those on borough networks, that without that proactive renewal and maintenance, you end up with much bigger bills and much greater disruption to the flow of traffic around London.
Okay. Thank you, Simon. That's helpful. Let's move on, please. We've got several people who want to ask questions. We're going to go to Anne first, then Heidi.
Thanks, Ron. Two issues from me, partly in fact building, I think, on what Ben was saying. First of all, I'd really like to understand the interrelationship, if there is one, between the furloughed staff and the pause on filling posts, etc., either non-permanent or permanent, and equally with the furloughed staff. I'm increasingly concerned in terms of value for money, in terms of what's not being done or what is the long-term implication of having 3,000 people on furlough, because they might not seem to be the ones that are day-to-day doing, frontline work, but they are what quite often keeps the organisation going in terms of controls and systems, etc. So I would just like to understand where we're at on furlough. Are we now expecting them all to come back at the end of October, given that I think that's when the funding ends on them? And also, as I say, the interrelationship between those and the freezing on posts that you've got going. My other issue is around, and it's picking up what Simon was saying around slipping expenditure from H1 into H2. It's really good, all the controls you've got, and as Ben says, some of these are things permanent that we would probably want to see permanently in place, but equally you are deferring or pausing large chunks of work, and I'd like to get a better understanding in terms of value for money, what the impact on the organisation is of having to put those programmes or expenditure on hold. I don't expect you can answer that at the moment, but I think in future we need to be seeing what is actually being permanently paused as opposed to slipped for a couple of months or whatever, and what the implication is for the organisation of that work not being done, both in terms of the work not being done, but actually the financial penalty that might end up being put on the organisation for not having got that work done. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I make an opening comment? It's Andy Byford here, and Simon and Tony, I'll let you guys answer the point around furlough. But first of all, good morning, everyone. My first finance committee is the new commissioner, or newish commissioner. I think we're something like 3 months in now. And I think you ask a very insightful question. I often refer to the slippery slope, and the slippery slope is deferring maintenance. There's no question, and that comment applies to all modes. So whether we're talking about repairing roads, bridges, tunnels, railway tracks, you do it at your leisure. It's a nice, tempting thing to do in the short term, but there's so much evidence out there in the world where you regret that. You do it in haste and you regret it at leisure. And so it's something we don't want to do. I think it's okay to do for a short period of time, but we're very mindful of the fact that you build up this bow wave or backlog of maintenance problems from which it can often take a disproportionate amount of time to recover. So, and if you're not careful, it can overwhelm you, because, I mean, as you mentioned, you cited some good examples. Next thing you know, you've got problems with Hammersmith Bridge. Okay, not our asset. We're doing repairs on Vauxhall Bridge. We've got Rotherhithe Tunnel, where basically vans and trucks cannot go through that tunnel because of the problems we got with the ventilation system. It should have been replaced years ago. We've got difficulties on the Westway. So you build up a backlog that takes a long time from which to recover, and B, you invariably it's false economy. You end up paying a premium because suddenly it's an emergency, whereas before it was something you needed to do, it becomes an emergency. So we'll put more granular detail back to you, but we're on the same page. My purpose in intervening was just to give you reassurance that we get that. We don't want to do it. If necessary, we'll do it short term, but we definitely don't want to pursue that as a strategy. And doubtless, Mr. Chairman, will come on to that in the next couple of items, particularly where we get talking about the financial negotiations and the comprehensive spending review. So Simon / Tony, would you mind just picking up the point, please, around furlough?
Absolutely, will do. So one of the things we were encouraged to do prior to achieving the H1 financial settlement was we were told to maximise our use of the available government funding schemes, of which only furlough applied to TfL. So in April, we looked at the fact that from a safety perspective, we were implementing a safe stop of our construction activity, and therefore large numbers of people involved in either the project, the end-to-end project life cycle, whether that's the planning of, the delivery of, or the assurance of those projects, wouldn't be having work to do whilst those safe stops were in place, which lasted for about 12 to 13 weeks. So that was a collective group of TfL and London Underground employees that we placed on furlough because the work had been paused. There were also, at that point in time, significant members of staff who either needed to be shielding themselves because of their own health, or they were protecting other vulnerable people in their household, either elderly relatives or children. And they actually made up the majority of people that we put onto the furlough scheme at that point in time to support them through that period. And then across the rest of the organisation, given the absolute cash crisis caused by the coronavirus, we looked at what we could stop. For example, we, in finance, for example, we didn't do a period one finance report because the imperative was to get a funding deal and prepare for a revised budget and finish the year-end accounts. So people who would have been associated with that type of activity, for example, were also put on furlough, and large numbers across support organisations where their work, whether it was contracting for new things in the procurement and supply chain area, or providing other services to the businesses in engineering and other areas, were again put on furlough because the work had to be put on pause. In terms of the headcount freeze, that was happening anyway, and we through last year and into this year, we've continued to really look at only replacing people when they leave the organisation through retirement or leaving, where that role is absolutely critical. We're also mindful throughout this period that, you know, furlough has put an increased pressure on those people who are remaining working. It has been a huge 6 months of pressure on many people, either at the front line or planning for and delivering those services throughout the organisation. And it is the intention that when the furlough scheme comes to the end at the end of October, that the employees who are currently on furlough will be coming back into the workforce. Of course, between now and the end of October, we need to secure a H2 funding settlement, and we also need to make progress on a longer term direction of travel around our investment programme, which we're going to be talking about later, because the size and shape of our capital delivery function will really depend upon the degree to which we have an agreed and funded investment plan going forward, given we're coming to the end of the first cycle of investment in TfL's first 20 years. And I just want to finally echo what Andy said, that we don't want to pause renewals. They are the wrong thing to do. They are poor value for money, but out of necessity sometimes, when you have inadequate funding and not a long-term settlement that allows you to plan ahead, those are the things you have to consider doing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Heidi, if we go to you and then Claire, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. And I don't know whether people will necessarily have figures to hand to answer this question, but just listening to Tony talk about the various spend and control measures that have been put in place, I'm interested, if we cast our mind back to when we set the emergency budget. I think we said that we would be looking to make £300 million worth of revenue savings across the year and 500 million of capital savings. And with the things that we have already done, so reducing use of non-permanent labour, headcount freezes, and there's some other changes. I just wonder, when we look back at the target that we set ourselves, what have we achieved so far? And what will that look like for the whole year? I don't know whether you've got those figures available, but I'm just interested in that.
Yeah, we'll break it out into a proper analysis for you all and bring it back next time as a reconciliation. But on slide 8 of the pack, where the operating cost performance is broken out, perhaps Tony and Raj can go into a bit more detail, but you can see that focus on only doing the things we need to do and really not spending money unnecessarily means that our core operating costs are 95 million better than we had anticipated in the revised budget. So, we're not aiming on operating costs, we're aiming to come in substantially under our revised budget by being really focused on only spending the things we must spend. But we'll break that down into what's actually savings versus timing differences. But the focus is absolutely there on only spending the absolute minimum we have to spend to deliver the outcomes we need to deliver on the operating cost side. On the capital side, again, there is some pressure that will be built as a result of the safe stop. Will increase our capital costs over the course of the year, this year and next. As you can see, 62 million of safe stop and stranded labour costs to date. But again, our focus is on more efficiently delivering our capital outcomes. And for example, on street space, you will have seen the same or greater outcomes delivered for substantially less money because of the way in which those things have been delivered compared to how previously we may have had the sort of the best possible engineering led design for delivering those things, but the more temporary measures are delivering the same outcome for a lot less money. We'll bring a report back to the next meeting.
And maybe just to add, we're midway through the business plan process with a really critical focus on the rest of this year and next year. So we're working through that with the executive team next week to really sort of break apart emergency budget, revised budget and business plan. So we'll be able to give you those 3 steps.
Thanks.
Thank you, that's great. Claire?
So my point was really, it was kind of complementary to what Heidi was saying, so I will make it very briefly. But no, just looking at OPEX, so the headline figure of 51 million, I think Simon, you said half of that is a temporary saving, so that's going to reverse out. If you took that out, then it's a 1% difference from the revised budget, and actually a slightly higher figure than than last year. I mean, having been through the sort of process, and when you talked about the Finance Commitment Oversight Group, very familiar process. We did those sorts of things in 2010 in times of austerity. My experience of those is that they do produce very significant reductions in spend. I mean, not without significant consequences, so they do have to be handled carefully. But I'm slightly surprised that that there's less evidence in the numbers of what that is doing, and I guess that links to a point which hopefully you are going to come back to next time, which is it's an entirely backward-looking finance report. So there's information up to P5, but I would always expect in the finance report to see the full kind of forecast end-year position, and that's what's not there now. I can see there are some very big uncertainties, both environmental and in terms of the discussions to be had with DFT. But it would be really helpful to be able to see what you think all of this adds up to for the whole of the year, rather than just where it's got you to at present.
Thanks, Claire. And yeah, so look, as I was saying on slide 8, you can see that the net £51 million position actually has some greater ups and downs in it. In particular, the additional costs for dealing with coronavirus, whether it's PPE, antiviral cleaning fluid, signage, other measures we've had to take, plus the cost of enacting a safe stop, are actually offsetting much greater levels of operating cost reduction that are being driven through the measures that we've taken. So, it is a big, complex business, and in the one-line report, it's you actually have to go into quite a lot of detail to understand what's going on. In terms of forward look, absolutely. We always usually provide a forward look on our finance reports of where we think we're going to end up. But with as yet no sight of what the H2 funding settlement is from government, and a huge degree of uncertainty over both the outcomes we're expected to deliver and the revenue position for the remainder of the year. It would be a forward-looking report that has a huge range of variation around both revenue and operating costs. So happy to do it and happy to provide those ranges. But normally we would be anticipating delivering within a range of 2 to 3% of our budget in any given year. And clearly this year is much more volatile than that.
Thanks, Simon. I'm going to pick up a little bit on that in a minute, but can I just go back to the oversight group? It's clear that there's some tight spending happening, there's some cash management happening, but Andy, Simon, can you just help me understand how much of this is, if you like, being pushed by the business to you, and how much of this is being pulled by the centre to extract it? I'm trying to get a sense of how difficult it is to get out. So that's part one, and then I've got a couple of other follow-ups, but I'll come back to that.
So the tighter controls were centrally driven, but because the method of delivery is a collective star chamber type approach, with including the majority of the ExCo members, as soon as we've got that process up and running, we are finding great support and proactive action across the businesses to bring things even below the thresholds we've set to that group to ask for guidance or approval, as the case may be. And for example, breaking the financial commitments, which we used to do, as you know, at PIC for a 2-year period, down into quarterly purchase orders, is driving much greater transparency and control into what are we actually needing to spend and needing to use. And there's been some great work going on beyond those things. Stuart Harvey has led, what he calls a think the unthinkable review of how do you deliver capital programs more efficiently. There's work going on across the organisation, but from Andy and myself and Tony and the team, setting that it is a cultural change to be running this as a business worried about liquidity and driving to achieve value for money in everything we do, from a business that has had in past years the luxury of sufficient funding to be able to deliver fantastic outcomes. There's obviously a balance that needs to be in those things without ever compromising safety, which again, as you'll know, is a fine line to walk, but we will not ever do anything that compromises safety through financial measures.
I think, Chair, the only thing I would add is that, and to echo really what Simon has said, is that it is testament to the professionalism of TfL staff that some of it has come up from below. We've really stressed to our leaders through a leadership call that we make on a regular basis. In fact, the next one just happens to be this afternoon. That although we will give centrally derived direction, and I think that's right, that we set the tone, we set the broad parameters, we set the expectations. We do expect local managers to manage responsibly, and that doesn't mean you've got a pot of money and you have to spend it all. If you don't have to spend it all, we collectively own the challenge. Everyone understands these are really tough times, that our revenue base has collapsed. So everything that we can do to contribute to reining in expense, particularly pending knowledge of what we're going to get by way of an H2's funding settlement and also the conditions attached thereto, everyone has a part to play in that, and that's certainly a point I'll be reinforcing this afternoon.
Yeah, I think the final thing just to add on that, Ron, is the other side of actual money spent is the management of risk in projects. And you'll recall over many years that we have perennially underspent in projects, in part because we've been over ambitious in terms of what we can actually deliver, and in part because we haven't managed risk as tightly as we should, which led to last year us resetting the budget in year and doing a full deliverability review of what we could actually deliver in both the renewals and the capital space. So I'm pleased to say that through the second half of last year and the first half of this year, the capital spend is much closer to the budgets that we've set, because we've become, we do deliverability assessments now before things go into the budgets, and we are much better at recognising the difference between the estimated financial cost of a project and the risk attached to it, and looking at the risk on a portfolio basis, and indeed driving to retire risk whenever we can and as fast as we can. And those disciplines again have been improving over the last 12 to 18 months. We've got a lot further to go in terms of capital programme efficiency, but we're making good progress.
Okay, thank you. My question was more to try and understand the culture, but Andy, Simon, thank you for the answer. It's really helpful, and it's good that this is coming through and being surfaced from within. So we will have an update at a future Finance Committee on procurement, as spoken about earlier. But also, I think the point that Heidi and Claire were talking about, I just want to extend that a bit further in terms of what we get. I think it would be helpful to have a deeper analysis, a bit more scientific analysis in terms of what is the impact, the short-term and more importantly the medium-term impact in terms of the future of TfL as a consequence of the furloughed activity. I'd like to have some conscious, make sure that we're making we're conscious of it and we've got visibility. So can we please log that for the future? It's an important part of a continuing service. Thank you all very much. That's very helpful. So if there are no other questions, which I can't see, no one's got their hand up. So I'll say that we will note the report as submitted. And thank you very much, Tony, Simon and team, for the work on that. We're going to move on to item 7, which is a late item. And I agreed to take this item as a late item on the agenda as information from the government wasn't available at the time that the rest of the agenda was published. And it's a very, very important subject for the organisation, and it's important that we have the most up-to-date position on it. Therefore, I've said, yes, we'll take this as a late item. The papers were published to members and on the website. There is some exempt information relating to this item, which is in part 2. and we will deal with that in the private session later. But I'm going to ask the team to lead it. Andy, I don't know if there's any words you want to say to kick off, and then we'll go through to the other members of the team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, indeed. I would just like to set the scene, if I may. I'll start at very high level and then get into the more granular detail. I mean, I think the context is well set out in the paper that you find in your pack, and it really does tells the story of how we've gone from a pretty positive position, as Tony talked earlier on about the cost that we've taken out of the organisation, £1 billion over the past 4 years, which is, you know, an incredible achievement. I think the point at which we got to almost break even for a major transport undertaking, you know, I look at that as the newbie, as someone who's come in from other authorities who couldn't even dream of getting anywhere near close to that. It's with the exception of Hong Kong, which has a very different model, that's practically unheard of. So and that was all within the context, of course, of the removal of the government grant, of you know, a very difficult period that we then entered with COVID, where we found that we were the historic reliance on OPEX, through the fare box, the 72% fare recovery was proven to be untenable in an unprecedented situation like COVID. So, you know, in good times, yep, you can probably rely on 72% fare box recovery just about. But I think, these sorts of incidents, these viruses, etc., pandemics, it does appear that they are going to become more prevalent. And B, I think it really has exposed that is dangerous to rely to 72% fare box recovery going forward. You contrast that with the likes of New York, where I previously was, 38%, and somewhere like Madrid, 49%. The norm being around 40–50% in my experience. So that has proven to be very risky, I guess is the real word, and certainly has proved to be catastrophic, where we've lost 90% of our revenue practically overnight because of the impact of COVID. So we are where we are. And it's very topical that we should be talking about the H2 funding settlement, because we are literally in negotiations right now on both the H2 settlement and also Crossrail. And I'd like to just unpack both of those a tiny bit. But again, by way of context, I've said for me as the incoming commissioner, I have two clear objectives. Number one is to lead TfL through and out of the COVID crisis, and that means sorting out the budget. That means rebuilding ridership and rebuilding the morale of the organisation. And second, equal priority, and because the two are intricately interlinked, is to finish off Crossrail and to get the Elizabeth line open. And the reason they're so interlinked is because until that Elizabeth line opens, it is an ongoing draw on the finances of TfL, and therefore has to form part of any settlement with government right now. The two deadlines, the need for cash being practically contemporaneous in terms of when we absolutely must get a settlement. And secondly, because until the line opens, obviously you're not earning any revenue. And when we do get end-to-end opening, we will, once customer numbers pick up, back to that interlinking, we will potentially get net on our bottom line £500 million a year. So those are the reasons why I've set them out as the two key priorities, because they're existential. They are two things that absolutely go hand in hand, and that's why we're dealing with the negotiation right now with DfT. So let's cut to the chase. With DfT, we're still awaiting, and I appreciate these are tough times for everyone. Everyone's got a huge challenge to face. Goodness knows the government has a lot on its plate. But with the H2 settlement, we really are reaching the point at which we absolutely must have clarity on what that H2 funding settlement looks like, both in terms of quantum, and as you know, we've set out that we need £2 billion for the second half of the year, £2.9 billion for 2020-2021. But also in terms of conditions. Obviously, we expect there to be conditions. We're not expecting a blank check. We conformed with conditions last time. But my plea to our colleagues at DfT, and we're working very well with them, is let's get negotiating. The negotiations have started, but with time is of the essence. We're right on the wire in terms of the point at which Simon, with his fiduciary responsibility, which cannot be underestimated, needs to make a call on, is this a viable concern going forward? So TFT understand that. My understanding on the H2 negotiation, the settlement, is we should be expecting a letter imminently from government, and I was very pleased and honoured actually to go to the DFT just the other day. I met in person with the Secretary of State, the Mayor and I went together, and the Secretary of State has said that a financial settlement will be forthcoming, so that's good. But again, I come back to, we need the detail. The devil's in the detail. We need to see what the quantum is. We need to see what the conditions are. Parallel to that is Crossrail funding. The Crossrail board announced just a few weeks ago that the project needs some more time and that it needs some more money. In fact, it needs £1.1 billion, including what was already forecast. It needs £1.1 billion in order to finish, with a projected finish date of best case end of 2021, but more likely the first half of 2022 to get the central core running. There again, time's against us. The financial authority for Crossrail, the ability to let new contracts, runs out in the middle of October. So there again, we're in very detailed discussions with DFT. They're going, I'd say, reasonably well. We've got more insight into what that deal might look like, but we're up against the wire. So my philosophy is we will do whatever it takes. We'll go the extra mile. We'll burn the candle. We'll have whatever negotiation is required. In parallel as informing the DFT settlement, the H2 settlement, we've got the ongoing KPMG review, and we have certainly been cooperating with that review. We've had 415 data files have been submitted to KPMG to inform them. 77 briefings of hard-pressed TfL staff so far to inform that review. So my mandate, my instruction to my organisation is absolute open book, absolute transparency, absolute full cooperation, because we know that our ask is a big one, but it's not an unrealistic one. It's not an unreasonable one. It's what we need to keep TfL going and to continue to serve the people of London. There is, of course, the long-term financial settlement. We'll come on to that in the CSR, Comprehensive Spending Review. And there again, we have what I call my sunny uplands way of looking at things, what it could look like if we get proper funding. We'll come on to that in the next item. But I hope that just gives you some context. I'll let Simon now deal with the detail. But the key headline that you need to be aware of, the whole committee needs to be aware of, and Mr. Chairman, certainly yourself, is it's almost the 23rd hour. It's almost 11 p.m. on the last day. We are right on the wire for needing to see the H2 settlement. I'm ready and willing. I'll negotiate through the night. I need to see that H2 letter. I need to see the conditions. Let's talk Turkey. Now is the time. We must not delay any further. Simon, would you like to just comment?
Yes, thanks, Andy.
Before you go there, let's deal with it. Thank you, Andy, for that. Let's just deal with it through the facts in terms of where we are, and then come on to talk about implications if it's not there. But let's just go through it systematically, please, Simon.
Okay, so the facts of where we are is, as you know, we had a half-one funding settlement for TfL that did not contemplate Crossrail funding. That expires on the 17th of October. That funding settlement had a flexible mechanism to provide revenue support, given the impact of the coronavirus upon TfL's revenues, but also much more significantly than the cash itself, given it was a short-term settlement and given our statutory obligation to run a balanced budget, to maintain a balanced budget in both the short and the medium term, so not just in the immediate term, but into the medium term, which is certainly into the next financial year and potentially further beyond that, in recognition of the long-term financial liabilities that we have and our ability to demonstrate that we can honour them. The half-one funding settlement had a number of provisions that provided comfort to myself, to Howard Carter, and to Tony as the statutory officers thinking about our obligations here, and to Mike and now Andy as the accounting officer for the organisation, that allow us to continue to run a full set of services with only a short-term funding settlement. So a commitment that recognised we have to have a balanced budget, and government would help us deliver a balanced budget over the full course of the year. An understanding that we had to enter into long-term commitments in order to deliver those level of services and an investment going forward that extend beyond not only H1 but beyond this financial year. And in recognition that there were a number of triggers in both our debt and other contractual liabilities linked to our credit rating and linked to the maintenance of a balanced budget, that without going into detail in an open public session, we can go into further detail on in a private session, that government would need to provide support and assurances to the counterparties to those contracts, given the situation we found ourselves in. So as we sit here today on the 30th of September, as Andy says, the Secretary of State has clearly stated that government will provide funding for TfL. And we take that at face value, but we do need to understand the quantum and the conditions attached to that as soon as possible. We can't go to the wire of the 17th of October on this, because we have to give certainty to our own supply chain. At the moment, I am unable to give our suppliers who deliver bus services, rail services, maintenance services on the road network, and all our other safety critical services that keep the operation going, the certainty they require and their own lenders are seeking, that we as TfL will stand behind our contracts. That is a material issue for our supply chain and our ability to continue to deliver our services, that is already seeing our suppliers make their own decisions about the level of jobs that they can maintain and the level of services that they will be able to support us with. This is not the position to be in. We asked to be in the position that the other major public transport entities in the UK were, that we can act as agent for the UK government in providing certainty to and supporting that supply chain, provided we had a funding agreement that allowed us to do so. So where we are now is that although we have, as you saw earlier, as at the end of period 5, we had nearly £1.6 billion of cash in the bank. As at today, our current expectation is, given the payments we've got going out over the next 2 or 3 weeks, that we will hit our minimum cash of 1.2 billion at some point in October. That is based upon using all but 11 million of the 1.6 billion pound funding agreement that was previously agreed. There was a 300 million pound contingent element on that we haven't needed because the revenue has been better than expected. That was signed off by government, and there have been discussions about continuing to use that 300 million, but as yet that has not concluded. The issue is, it's not when the cash runs out or when we hit minimum cash, it is the absolute certainty that we will run out of cash without an adequate funding agreement, both for this year and, most importantly, we can't carry on a deficit into the next financial year without knowing how we're going to resolve it. By the 30th of November, I have to legally submit a budget to the GLA for the next financial year. As we stand today, we don't know the basis upon which we will be able to submit that budget. You know, the measures that I've put in place over the last few weeks and enhanced last week to really start curtailing the new financial commitments we can enter into until we get to a point where we have an agreed funding deal will start to bite in terms of the things that we can continue to deliver for London. So, as I said, in particular, the way our bus contracts work is that every year we renew 20% of our, retender 20% of our bus contracts. That means that every month, 150 to 200 million pounds of bus contracts are awarded. As it stands today, we're not in a position, without the certainty of both a short and longer term funding deal, we are going to quickly face the need to not award new bus contracts, but to extend existing ones. That means that the service can continue, but the investment in new buses that new contracts brings is under threat. And we know that jobs in the manufacturing, the bus manufacturers are very concerned. We do not want the bus manufacturers to be putting people at risk of redundancy. We need to replace London's bus fleet, and we need to electrify it. We really want to be able to have the certainty to be able to stand behind them. But as it stands today, when asked a direct question, the answer I have to give is I cannot give you that certainty without a funding settlement. There are real consequences to where we are. But we have been told, we accept at face value there will be funding. We just don't know how much it's going to be. We've asked for £2 billion of funding, and we recognise that there could be a variation of between 350 and £500 million plus or minus to that number, given the uncertainty of what demand might be during this COVID period. It's incredibly difficult to plan ahead and continue to commit to delivering the current level of services without a framework in which to do so. If we add to that, as Andy mentioned, the contemporaneous issue of Crossrail and a £1.1 billion additional funding needed to complete the project, Crossrail in and of itself has written to both sponsors and set out that they are almost immediately facing problems with their own supply chain, being able to not give them the certainty they need to continue working beyond the end of October on the project. And we therefore must reach an agreed way forward on how Crossrail is going to be funded immediately, because that actually becomes a pressing issue immediately rather than over the next few days. So we are working on that. The GLA and DfT and TfL have been working really collaboratively on the Crossrail funding issue. We understand that it's being discussed today, and we hope to achieve a resolution of it today, which would be a big relief, because Crossrail in and of itself is such a significant risk to us financially that it would cause us to consider our own financial going concern and balanced budget status absent a funding situation for Crossrail. There probably is more I could say, but wouldn't want to say in public, because we must maintain the confidence of our supply chain and their lenders, but we could go into more detail on this in a closed session. Okay, Simon, I would like you just to repeat something that you said, because I do think that for members of the public, etc., who are understanding or listening to it, when we start talking about numbers 1.6 billion in terms of cash, just explain again the importance of why the contracts that you talked about. Give the bus example again, because I do think that that's a really important way to frame it, because to anyone listening without the background of TfL, anyone says we've got 1 billion in cash, it's a huge amount of money. So just please reiterate that for me. Thank you. Absolutely. So TfL is a £10 billion a year organisation, putting Crossrail to one side. Other than our directly employed staff, which is about 20% of that cost, the remaining £8 billion of our annual budget is contracted for often many years with the supply chain. The bus contracts are a great example. £2 billion a year to run the bus service through the bus contracts, which are accepted and being rolled out nationally as the most effective way to run bus services. That means that on 5 to 7 year contracts, that as I said, we relet every 20% every year. At any one point in time, just on the bus contracts alone, we have £7 billion of contractual liabilities to the bus operating companies. We have £2 billion of liabilities to Siemens for the new Piccadilly line trains. We have £12 billion of external debt. We have a set of pension trustees and a pension deficit that is covered by the pension regulators. Putting Crossrail again to one side on TfL on our own, we have £5.5 billion assets in the course of construction under our investment programme. And of course, we have our legal commitment and our ethical commitment to our staff around their own contractual position with TfL. TfL is treated as a local authority for finance purposes, unlike any other utility in the UK. What that means is all of our creditors rank equally and without priority. So we have about, at any one time, nearly £30 billion of current and long-term liabilities, against which we have, in normal times, our income and our path to turning our deficit into a surplus, and a cash balance. Those are the only things that we have. We don't have shareholders who are able to put in more equity, and we don't have standby credit lines that we can draw down upon, because all of our debt counts towards public sector net debt and has been tightly controlled in agreements with the Treasury. We have no further ability to borrow, so we can't use standby facilities anyway. And therefore, that means that having an adequate cash balance to see us through a normal level of business variability or business interruption is the normal, prudent thing that any organisation would have. 1.2 billion is 2 months worth of operating cash. It's not even 2 months worth of full expenditure, because that would include debt service and capital programs as well, which would be nearer to 850 million a month. It is the minimum that the credit rating agencies are saying to us that we need to assure our lenders and other creditors that we can demonstrate that we remain a going concern. But of course, in the situation in which we currently find ourselves, with a complete collapse in our revenue and only a very short-term funding settlement with no long-term framework in which to plan, that £1.2 billion cash balance is already spent. It's already owed to our creditors. It doesn't buy any more time in terms of entering into new contracts or continuing to operate beyond the H2 funding agreement, which expires on the 17th of October. And because, as I said, it's not just about the cash, it's about those government comfort around standing behind those liabilities, which are 30 times or more our cash balances and our ability to service with our current assets, that our suppliers and their lenders are really worried about the current situation. We have to achieve a funding settlement before the deadline. Otherwise, it's not just the action we will have to take in terms of a statutory local government finance Section 114 process, it is the action our suppliers will be forced to take, because we can't give them the certainty that they need.
All right, Simon, that's really helpful. Look, thank you. I'm very heartened, as I think we all are, that there was a positive meeting, Andy, as you report, between the Secretary of State and the Mayor and yourself. And there was assurance, verbal assurance given. So now it really is about the detail. I'm going to ask Claire to just come in and give any update that you can, Claire, in terms of timing, because clearly, we have a duty here in this forum, a fiduciary duty, if you like, on a very live issue, to a duty of care in terms of oversight of the finances and the sustainability of TfL. So, Claire, any advice for us, please, in terms of your perspective on this?
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Can I firstly, I think I've got quite an unstable internet connection, so if I disappear, I will try and I might have to turn the camera off. So, I mean, the first thing to say is, on behalf of DfT, to whom I have been talking, I think they are extremely grateful to TfL for the collaboration and the constructive engagement that there's been, both with the department directly and with KPMG. As Andy says, there's been a huge amount of information provided, and the time that is needed to input to that sort of process when people are very busy. So they are very appreciative of that. I think the other thing, again, to reiterate, which both Andy and Simon have referred to, is that the Secretary of State has given an assurance that support will be provided. So, I mean, I personally, from having been in some of these situations myself, I completely understand the anxiety about how close we are to the end of the period. But I think that assurance is very important, and I think Simon is absolutely right that should be taken at face value. I mean, it is. I know from talking to DfT, it is a very, very high priority for them to engage with TfL on the substance. I think, and I think they would have hoped to be at this point earlier than now. But I mean, as you will all be aware, there is a huge amount going on at the moment with the situation in relation to coronavirus infections, and I think there is a desire on everybody's part, while the immediate funding priority is at H2, actually to be thinking about what is the trajectory to a sustainable financial model for TfL, which I know Andy and others are very keen to get to. And it's important that what is put to TfL as a proposal has been kind of properly constructed across government, and inevitably there are multiple players. So I mean, that's a long way of saying this has taken a bit longer than DfT expected or hoped. But no, as Andy says, certainly the conversations I've had with DfT reinforce. I mean, it is absolutely imminently they are going to be putting something. It will. I mean, inevitably there will be conditions. I'm sure there will need to be engagement. But I think that, I mean, the least and the most I can say is I think the waiting is nearly over.
Okay, Claire, thank you. Andy, from the conversations that you have had, is there any sense of what conditions may apply that you want to share, or is it, or is it just better just to wait till we get confirmation in terms of what it is?
I think I'd rather wait for the latter, Chair. I don't think it's fair to anyone to negotiate in public, and I certainly wouldn't want to speculate what the DfT might put by way of conditions. But certainly, I just reiterate, we very much appreciated that meeting with the Secretary of State. It was businesslike, it was professional, and my colleagues at the DfT have been scrupulously professional. So we're nearly there, as Claire said. Claire, we really appreciate your assistance in this regard. We're nearly there, but we cannot take our eye off this. And certainly once I've got those conditions, I'll be happy, Chair, to share them with you, because obviously, we'll need to see what they are. We'll need to see the practicality of them. We'll need to see the applicability of them. And then we can really get into the hard detail and hopefully move into a place where we can focus once again on delivering excellent service. That's what I really want to get to.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And look, I think it's clear that there is progress being made in terms of the mood music is very positive, but we just need to kind of get to the next stage. There are some questions in the room. Nina first, and then Anne, please.
Thank you, Chair. And it was very heartening to hear of the waiting is nearly over comment from Claire. It does, as a board member of TfL and a member of this committee, could Ron and the team assure how, when we do get this feedback from government, from the DfT, on a little bit more of the certainty, how we as the Finance Committee can be made aware of this? Because nearly everything that we're going to be talking in the rest of this committee meeting is, predicating on understanding what this funding model is likely to be. So we're going to be making comments on some key core strategies going forward, and we don't know what the underlying is going to be. So I'm a bit concerned that I can do my support as a board member in an as accurate and as effective a way. So in my head, I'm carrying some assumptions that there will be a package, but there's still such a lot of uncertainty about what the scope and those conditions will be. Thank you.
Yeah, Nina, thank you. Let me have a go at that. Look, so I think that the simple way that I would suggest we do this is that we adopt a business as usual as much as we can approach within this. In other words, we continue to assume that the right thing will be done for the sustainability of TfL from a finance point of view. If there are any changes to that, then obviously we'll have to revisit that at the right time. What I'd also suggest is that when Simon, Andy, you receive that, we can have a conversation and decide how we communicate that once you've had a chance to digest it and obviously considered the size, scale, implications whatever form they will take. And then I think we can potentially regroup here at a finance committee, because there might be some things that, as Nina says, there'll be things that will have an impact. So we can judge that. But for now, I would rather just say, let's carry on down the path we are. We've got quite a lot of things going on in the organisation. There are moving bits all over the place, but that's the simplest way to do it. Andy, would that be your approach?
Most certainly, Chair. As soon as we've got information, I will immediately call you. You can hold me 100% accountable for that. We'll need your help. We'll need your guidance. We're ready to roll. As soon as we get that letter, I'll be in touch with you, and obviously with the Deputy Mayor as my immediate boss.
Thank you. Okay. Nina, are you comfortable with that, please?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Anne.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of comments really more from me. Whilst it's clearly disappointing that we haven't reached a settlement yet in terms of going forward, I am assured and quite content with what Claire's saying, that actually the waiting is nearly over, because I would hate to be the statutory finance officer at TfL at the moment, trying to determine when was the right time to say we've hit the barrier on this. I think it's also really helpful that Claire is saying that DfT, and part of the delay is due to DfT trying to look at the medium term and not just the second half year, because I think it is absolutely crucial that TfL gets some feeling for where we're going to be for the next financial year as well. And also the comments about the impact on the private sector and the bringing the economy out of COVID, I think is something that needs to be brought to the fore all of the time, in terms of not just London, but actually across the country, in terms of the amount of contracts that we as an organisation procure across the country, and helping the government in bringing the nation out of this particular series of downturns in terms of COVID. My last comment really was on Crossrail as well, because I know Simon and Co haven't sort of really plugged on this, but I would say as well that I know we want to get Crossrail open because of the financial help it would give TfL. But I also think we need to remember it actually gives a capacity boost to TfL in terms of social distancing travelling. And we really need to be clear that we need to get it on the system as quickly as possible to actually help London recover from the downswing in terms of COVID. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. That's very helpful. A few other hands have gone up. Heidi first, and then Simon. Ben, you had your hand up and you put it down, so if there is something, we'll come back to you. Heidi, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chair, just so you know, I didn't recall putting it down, but it's up.
Okay, we'll come back to you in just a moment.
Sorry about that. I think much of what I wanted to say has already been said, so I will be very brief. I joined the discussion that Andy referred to with the Secretary of State and the Mayor last week, and Andy's completely right. It was, very welcome to hear the Secretary of State confirm that there will be a funding deal. I do think it is absolutely critical now. No matter what happens with this virus, in the coming weeks and months, we can be sure of one thing, and that is that London is going to need its transport system, and London is going to need frequent services to enable social distancing. And it goes to the point that Anne has just made. Londoners' tolerance for overcrowding has evaporated throughout this crisis, understandably so. And so we can't be in a position where the amount of money that we get requires us to countenance significant reductions in services, because there's a very simple link between the amount of services that we're running and the amount of space that people have to travel. And even if less travel is happening in London, we saw at the height of the pandemic that many of our key workers, people working in supermarkets, in the hospitals, were completely dependent still upon the public transport network. And we need to ensure that no matter what happens, people can continue to travel safely. And so I think it is critical that we get this sorted soon for all the reasons that Simon and Andy have talked about, but also to give confidence to Londoners that no matter what happens in the next couple of months, those transport services that they depend upon will be there for them. And I also think the discussion that we've had about the bus contracts and the impact of decisions taken in London on, you know, manufacturing bases in places like Falkirk up in Scotland, where many of our buses are assembled. These are real life impacts. People are actually losing their jobs at the moment because TfL is in a position where it can't let new contracts. And when you consider the fact that in London, I think it's between a third and a half of all new buses that are ordered in the UK actually end up in London. The orders come from London. This is just so significant actually for the UK economy. So for all of those reasons, I really, really hope that, you know, in the next couple of days, the next couple of weeks, we've got a clear resolution to this problem.
Thanks, Heidi. That's very helpful. Simon, I can see that you've got your hand up, and Ben will come to you.
Yeah, thank you. It was just actually to build upon the points that Heidi has raised. So whilst, you know, as I said, we are taking the comfort at face value at the moment, we do need to know, you know, imminently what the size and shape of this deal is for two reasons. One, if it's going to be significantly less than the £2 billion we've asked for, the only place to go is the level of services we can run. There is nowhere else to go to reduce expenditure, and that is not what London needs us to be doing, but we need to know that, because the second point is, whatever the shape and size and conditions of the deal are, they take time to implement. And so we absolutely cannot be held hostage like last time to a 12th hour deal on the 17th that we then can't implement because we haven't got the time to do so, and we don't have time to engage in a meaningful discussion about the real impacts of some of the decisions that might be being made. So we must start to engage in a proper two-way negotiation to understand and to help ensure that the outcomes that are achieved are the ones that people really want to see happening.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. This may not be helpful, but I kind of feel obliged to ask the question. We seem to have, you know, this looming deadline of the 17th just for the H2 settlement. We've got a looming deadline on Crossrail. And if someone could remind me what's happening with the governance of Crossrail, because I think at some stage Crossrail was coming into TfL. So I just want to, if someone could remind me of that deadline as well. I mean, I guess my question for Simon, and this may be the unfair bit, but as a finance committee, I mean, I kind of feel I need to know when's the cutoff, because the cutoff isn't the 17th. Maybe you can't answer it directly, but you know, it's very difficult as a board member and a member of this committee to sit here and just have this complete ambiguity and vagueness. And so, you know, is the cutoff tomorrow? Is it the 10th? I mean, because, you know, I need to kind of know that as a board member, because we will need to convene this group, I imagine, at some point in time, presumably before the 17th, if we haven't got a settlement on one or the other. And so I don't know, I'm just struggling a little bit with some of the ambiguity here as a board member. I find it makes me quite anxious, given the responsibilities that we have. But maybe, Simon, it's something you want to answer in the private, in private, after this public session. I don't know, but I'm left here feeling, reassured, obviously, in relation to the H2 settlement. I haven't really had much assurance around Crossrail so far, so I'm not particularly assured about that. And then, but I still feel very anxious that it's incredibly indeterminate and ambiguous, and we only have a few days to go. And so that's probably not particularly helpful, Chair. But I don't know, I'm looking for a little bit more concreteness, and in particular, I wouldn't mind just being reminded about, I haven't heard so much about Crossrail, which I think is contemporaneous. I think it is a separate issue, but it is incredibly closely linked, as you said at the beginning, Andy. And so where are we on that, and what are some of the constraints and timing issues around that?
And can I just build on that question, because I think it's something I think we ought to just make sure we're clear on. So look, I think everything I've heard today gives me confidence that the right conversations are taking place, and importantly, as I referenced it earlier, the mood music is there. We've had assurances from the Secretary of State, which is quite a significant statement in itself. Getting that into a piece of paper with some thoughtful conditions is going to be vital, so we can understand that. But what I'd like to just understand from you, Simon, when you come to it, in answer to Ben's point, is what is the implications, or what are the implications if this is not received? You know, we all understand there are, we talk about Section 104, but I'd like you to just explain that to the committee to make sure that we're all clear. So, Andy, I don't know if there's something you wanted to come in on first. And then
if I may, Chair, thank you. And I'll deal with the Crossrail item, if I may, and then I'll throw to Simon to talk about the broader TfL implications. And I'll just start by just saying, it's just to pick up a point that was made earlier, that around the negotiation and the criticality of the timing. At the end of the day, we're public servants, we're professionals. And one of the reasons I'm so keen to engage is because it may be to the point around conditions, and there will be conditions on the deal. Another reason we don't want the conditions at the last minute is we can help you, DfT. If there was something that really was impractical, why don't we just discuss it now to avoid that becoming an issue at the last minute? We may be able to offer better substitutes. We're professionals. We could offer a better substitute that would actually be able to be implemented and would maybe deliver the same quantum. So my point is, let's get talking now. As I said, I'll burn the midnight oil. I just want to get going. So, Ben, to reassure you, although it's an odd way of providing reassurance, I'm equally anxious, right? I'm anxious. I'm as the commissioner, particularly as the newly installed commissioner, the last thing I want to preside over is a disastrous situation for Crossrail, where we literally run out of financial authority, or on the wider issue, facing the doomsday scenario of my CFO saying to me, we're out of cash. We're a non-viable concern. We're not a going concern. We have to start slashing service. That's anathema to me. I'm a lifelong public servant, but also I've been in transit my whole life. You know, I'm about providing service, expanding service, not cutting it back. So on Crossrail, where we are with it is, again, since day one of my tenure, I've said that I want to have direct control of Crossrail. The existing CRL board, including Anne, has done a great job in rescuing it actually from a terrible situation back in 2018. But for many reasons, and it was always anticipated, by the way, that Crossrail would come into the TfL fold at some point, but probably, around the end of the year. I'm saying, no, let's do it now. The sooner we get Crossrail into the broader TfL family, the sooner we can really mould the project with the ultimate owner and operator, TfL, and the sooner we can provide a single controlling mind to really drive the thing across the line and get it up and running. So I've been advocating for that, and the good news is we've come up with a structure that will see, and a transition plan that will see Crossrail migrate, the Crossrail board hand over control basically to me, so that I can drive this thing across the line. And we're almost at the point where we're able to do that. But that comes concurrent with this looming problem around budget. So they're linked, but at the end of the day, as I pointed out many times to DfT, the looming budget issue, and it is not a function of the transition. It was going to happen anyway. The financial authority expires mid-October. So we will be having this discussion anyway, regardless of the transition. I happen to think transition's our best path to the earliest, cheapest, safe completion of the project. That's my view. You can ultimately judge me on whether I was correct on that. But we will be having the discussion anyway. So the looming issue is that although the cash is there, there's cash until the spring of next year. financial authority expires the middle of this month. We won't be able to let any new contracts. People will start to leave the project. We won't be able to say with certainty that we can service our suppliers and contractors in finishing off Crossrail. So the doomsday scenario for Crossrail will grind to a halt. We just can't afford that. DfT get it. As I said earlier, to somewhat mitigate your anxiety, we're nearly there. I actually think we'll get a Crossrail deal before we get a H2 deal. So I share your anxiety, but that's where we are with it. If it gives you any reassurance, I am personally all over it, all over Crossrail, and will remain so until the day it opens and beyond. Simon, maybe you could just cover, please, the other points made about the broader H2 issues and TfL.
Yeah. So look, I'd really like to discuss that properly with you in a part B private discussion, because it does have significant issues for a number of stakeholders and other parties. So can we have a discussion and then we can come back and conclude on that in public, rather than, I don't think it would be fair to our stakeholders or our suppliers to have that discussion in public at this point.
Okay, Simon, that's fine. I'm happy with that. Claire, you've got your hand up. Can I just bring you back in, please?
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much indeed. It was really just to say on the Crossrail point that I know that DfT are endeavouring to provide additional certainty on funding today, and are partly tying in with the governance changes. So that is, I think Simon was hinting at that earlier, but that is certainly their intention.
Okay, that's very positive. Thank you. Right, Ben, thank you. Look, and I think it's an important point, so thank you for raising it. We do need to get clarity for all the reasons, but as I said, that everything is moving the right direction. It really is a question of just getting the detail as to what that will mean. Right, let's move on, if we may, please, and we will cover that in part 2. And if there's anything relevant, we'll open it back up for public information. We're going to move on to item 8, please, which is the CSR, the Comprehensive Spending Review. Once again, I agreed to take this as a late item on this agenda because the deadline for the submission to the government fell after the date that the papers were published for this meeting. They have been published and are on the website, and members have been made available of it. There's exempt supplementary information relating to this item also in part 2, which we will cover in the private session. But in the first instance, I'm going to hand over to Simon to walk us through this particular agenda item. Simon, thank you.
Yeah, could I mention, it's Howard. In fact, I think there wasn't a part 2 for this item in the end. There was only a part 1 paper.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Andy, did you want to preface this before I go into the detail?
Very briefly then, thank you, Simon. I mean, all I'll say on this is, and it picks up really where I was going earlier. Obviously, H2 and Crossrail, 2 absolute immediate priorities for us, and certainly for me personally. But I'm also passionate about the need for a long-term financial settlement for TfL. It's very hard actually to run a £10 billion organisation with a very short-termist approach to budgeting. You know, you can't really plan with certainty. You can't really leverage good value out of contractors and get the efficiencies that a long-term settlement would afford. So I've said, and I mentioned it the other day actually to the Secretary of State, I would love to have, I mean, I'd love to have a 10-year funding deal, but I'd love to have a 5-year funding deal, maybe outside the political cycle, so that you could plan with certainty an affordable, predictable, keyword, predictable funding stream, such that we know what we've got to play with. We would commit to outputs akin to Network Rail's control periods in their high-level output statement, not saying they're perfect, but that kind of concept. And I think that we could really then motor as an organisation, because we would have the certainty of knowing what finances we had to play with. So we put together a comprehensive spending review package, a submission that we're trying to make compelling. We want it to press the government's buttons. The government wants to build out of the COVID crisis. That's great. So they need projects. Check. We have loads of projects, things that need to be done. They want to see levelling up across the country. Again, check, we can do that. As Heidi mentioned earlier, we buy buses in Falkirk, we buy steel in Scunthorpe. You know, we build trains in Goole in East Yorkshire. So 55p of every pound is spent across the country, not in London. So we can share that wealth. And we can also check the box on the environmental agenda if we move to bus electrification. I want to get on with it. Let's do it. Let's make it a reality. Let's be a world leader on this. So we put together, I think, a compelling document, but it's compelling, but it's also realistic. We do understand that the country is facing tough times. So there's things we really do want to do, but that we're saying may have to take a backward seat if less than 100% funding is forthcoming. So it's anchored around state of good repair. Back to my point about the slippery slope earlier, it's anchored around state of good repair. You've got to get that done first. Then the renewal items that we really have to address, and then the expansion projects that, again, we really want to progress and will help the country pull out of COVID. But we do recognise that we've got to be realistic in this regard. So that's just an opener, Mr. Chair. Over to Simon for some detail.
Thanks, Andy. So look, this is a really, really important document for us to publish and to be able to talk about publicly. As I've said a number of times, we've come to the end of a 20-year investment cycle. You'll all know, as board members, that we are close to the delivery of Crossrail. We are close to the delivery of Bank Station and the Northern Line extension and Barking Riverside extension and the 4-line signalling upgrade. We've delivered the Victoria Line upgrade and we've delivered the new trains on the subsurface railway. So TfL's first 20 years and the investment programme that has sat there was clear, it was understood, people knew that what that would do would be, it would enable us to renew and upgrade the aged infrastructure that TfL inherited when it was created, and that effectively that investment in walking, cycling and public transport has allowed us to become one of the only integrated public transport agencies in the world that has delivered a significant shift from people using cars to people using walking, cycling and public transport, from 51% in 2000 to 63% in early 2020, just before COVID struck. That in and of itself gives you an enormous economic agglomeration benefit that's helped drive the £39 billion a year surplus that London's taxes contribute towards the rest of the country in the levelling up agenda, but also to jobs and growth and housing in London. It's helped really cement London as a global city, and it's helped show over the past 20 years that investment in London is a message to the world about London's place in the world. As we've known for a number of years, since 2017, we've had no long-term funding certainty, and therefore we haven't been able to articulate what a plan for the next 10 to 20 years looks like. So we started, as Andy said, with our assets. We, over the last 2 years, have created a 25-year asset strategy that sets out in engineering terms what we need to do to maintain, renew and replace our existing assets, to satisfy our statutory obligation to be a good steward of those assets first and foremost, to ensure the safety and efficient and effective operation of that transport infrastructure. And what we know is, whilst we've done a huge amount over the last 20 years, we've only done about 40% of the job in terms of upgrading the existing asset base that we have. And therefore, we need to prioritise the investment in replacing and renewing the core mass public transport assets going forward. The Bakerloo line and Piccadilly line trains are 55 years old. They're the oldest fleets in the UK. They were life expired many years ago, and we've managed to patch and mend them, but that costs a lot of money, right? It costs a huge amount of money to keep these aged assets going. It also costs a huge amount of money to continue with obsolete signalling that has to be retooled every time we need a new part. So at the heart of this strategy is Andy and I are determined to have a clear strategy for our fleet. We want 2 sets of rolling stock for the underground, and we want a common signalling approach for the underground rather than the 7 or 8 different fleets and signalling systems we have today. With the certainty that we can deliver that investment, we can completely rethink about the efficiency of how we operate and maintain our assets. That comes with a fleet that is modern and allows us to become a much more efficient and effective public transport organisation going forward. And on the back of those upgrades, which we have to do to maintain safety, operability and reliability, the modern technology equivalents provide capacity uplifts. Now, over many years, we've argued for capacity uplifts because London has been growing. As Heidi said earlier, we have to win people back to public transport post-COVID, and they're only going to get back on public transport if they feel there is sufficient capacity for them to travel in safety. So the capacity argument, of course, it will help support economic growth going forward, but it's not about that. It's about demonstrating to everybody who benefits and uses from the London public transport system that you will be able to travel safely. And that is about ensuring there is sufficient capacity to do so. Then also, in everything that we're doing, we're aiming to accelerate the point at which we become a carbon neutral public transport system. So new trains, new signalling, modern track on the tube allow us to become carbon neutral. We're already an electric railway, one of the only fully electric railways in the world, but the new trains are more energy efficient, the new signalling is much more efficient, and the new track is much more efficient. So we've got to do that. But also, we have an opportunity now to really pivot our investment programme around accelerating the decarbonisation of the rest of our public transport network, and in particular, as we've mentioned a couple of times, the electrification of the bus network, which we would like to bring forward from 2037 to 2030. That, as Heidi said, 50% of all new buses ordered in the UK are ordered by London. You cannot electrify the UK's bus fleet without electrifying London's bus fleet, and you cannot front run it by electrifying other parts of the UK's bus fleet because the bus companies cascade their buses out of London. So we, for our city, for the inhabitants of our city and their health, but also for our people, that goal of becoming a carbon neutral public transport system by 2030 is a really compelling investment vision and an investment case that delivers massive dividends. And then on the back of that, continuing to work on how we invest in our street assets and our bus assets so that we continue our most, our roads and the borough roads are our most scarce resource in public transport terms in London. And we have had to underinvest in them in the last few years because of that lack of certainty. We know the economic impact on freight and businesses of having to take the A40 Westway or the Rotherhithe Tunnel out of service for safety reasons. We can't, we must win the case that investing properly in those assets is good for economic growth going forward. We also know that continued active travel, which works, hand in hand with mass public transport, will also reduce the bill for the NHS. So investment in active travel in London, whilst we don't recover the revenues from it, we do reduce the bill for the NHS in terms of the pollution and inactivity costs that they face. And then finally, we do need to continue to regenerate those parts of London that are still some of the most deprived parts of the entire UK. And we know that public transport is the enabler of that. We really see a way in which we can use our land as we already have. We're already, as you know, working on delivering 10,000 homes on TfL land. In furthering discussions we've had with MHCLG, we believe we can unlock up to 20,000 more homes on TfL land in the next 10 years. And also through the Housing Infrastructure Fund and our co-investing with developers through our growth fund, that we can ensure we deliver some modest additions to the network, like the DLR extension to Thamesmead, in order to support regeneration of parts of London and delivering housing and jobs across London that benefit the rest of the UK. So that's the core of our plan. it delivers, it continues to enable us to deliver our part to play in strengthening the UK's economic recovery from COVID. We really can help make the UK a scientific superpower, and in particular a leader in terms of the green public transport economy through the orders we can place with that certainty. And the thing that I really want to just finish on, as you all know as board members, it's going to take private sector investment to get us out of the COVID emergency and back to growth. We don't have to spend the money ourselves to achieve that, but we have to give certainty of orders in order for the supply chain to invest in jobs and invest in innovation, which will help build back our economy better.
Simon, thank you. That's really comprehensive, and Andy, thank you as well. I'm going to open it up to any questions that people have got. The papers I thought were very, very good in terms of the substance. Claire, you've got your hand up. I think that might be from a previous discussion, but if you have got it up, I'll leave you to adjust it as appropriate. One thing before I bring in other board members is there's a lot of information in here. There's a lot of thinking that's clearly gone in. We are in a very precarious place financially, and frankly, we're going to be in that situation for a period of time. Just how do you think about the level of prioritization and the kind of chronology of the spend, if you can put it that way? I mean, I know that we're not at that level of detail yet, but it'd be helpful just to understand that, because there's a danger that this comes across as a wish list of everything, which is not. And this is about essential work for the future of the city and the country by definition. But can you just help me understand how you think about prioritization and chronology?
Yeah, so let me start, and perhaps Andy and Tony want to chip in. So as Andy and I have said, first and foremost, we have to invest in renewing and replacing our existing assets to maintain the existing public transport network. That has to be our first priority. It's a statutory objective, and it's incumbent upon us from safety and operability standards. So that has to be our first priority. We have an opportunity. This is a CSR. This is about opportunity as well as about necessity. Our Piccadilly Line rolling stock contract has provisions in it to be able to follow on in the next 18 months or so with orders for the Bakerloo and Central Line trains. In order to secure the jobs that Siemens are planning to create around the factory that they are commissioning in Goole, they really need the certainty that there will be the follow-on orders. Without those follow-on orders, they could make those trains in Austria. They don't need to make them in the UK. It's really important. Similarly, Piccadilly Line signalling. In the past, Piccadilly Line signalling was an imperative because of connecting Heathrow to the central activity zone. It's not just about that anymore. It's about the Piccadilly Line signalling having the same capability as the Piccadilly Line rolling stock to set the direction for the next 20 years of signalling across all of our network, having a single investment strategy for signalling that allows us to be much more efficient in terms of how we maintain and operate our signalling systems and how we replace our legacy systems in a value for money way. They're really core to have that certainty, to make those big decisions, make those big commitments in order to set us on the right path and to set our supply chain on the right path. Then there are opportunities thereafter that, from an asset perspective, the Jubilee Line trains are some of our youngest, but they are fundamentally structurally flawed. We know that from last year when we had to take them out of service. They have a design flaw, and we are looking at what we can do about that. But ideally, we would accelerate the replacement of the Jubilee Line trains because it would help us serve the central activity zone with greater capacity. You'll recall we had to, one of the first things we did when we were under financial pressure was remove the additional trains for the Jubilee and Northern Line, and because the business case wasn't good enough to get new trains from a 22-year-old design or 26-year-old design, but replacing the entire fleet is needed from an asset perspective. It then allows us to cascade the trains that are still working and are still safe to do so onto the Northern Line, which means we can then, with an investment in Camden Station, separate the Northern Line and get the most capacity out of our existing assets for a relatively small investment in upgrading Camden Station. So this is a holistic strategy that delivers as a package rather than a menu or wish list of things that you might want to select things from. And then, alongside all of that work to ensure that our tube network and our rail networks become carbon neutral as soon as possible, there is the opportunity here to be the anchor for the UK bus industry and the UK government in electrifying the bus fleets and the battery technology and the hydrogen technology that we're also underpinning through Bamford and their takeover of Wright Brothers in Northern Ireland. So this is a holistic strategy that answers every single one of the 6 aims the government set out in its comprehensive spending review objectives. And then finally, also because housing remains a government priority, how we maximise the use of our land, the GLA's land and other member of the GLA's family land by either building on our own land or providing additional connectivity to those areas. That package gives you a massive reduction in carbon, a massive boost for the NHS in terms of reducing some of the outcomes that drive cost there, and shows the world that the UK takes London seriously and is going to continue to invest in London. Because I can tell you, as the CFO that speaks to our bond investors on a daily, on a frequent basis, they are wanting to see that there is ambition to invest in London. They see it, and our investment programme is a signal to the world about the level of ambition for investing in the UK going forward. And we've tried to put together here a package that achieves the core aims that we have, is ambitious but not overly ambitious in terms of continuing to pursue the big mega additions to our network, which we know we need for the MTS, but they're just not going to be possible to deliver in the next 10 years. Okay, Andy, do you want to come in and just quickly follow up on that?
Yeah, and I'll really keep it quick because that was a very comprehensive response from Simon. I mean, it's just, for what it's worth, been elsewhere, this is how to do it. It's not a wish list. It starts with what you should always start with, which is state of good repair. I've always said it's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory if you open some sexy new extension, but oops, oh dear, at the boundary you can't go any further because, oh dear, the switches have failed. The points have failed. The tracks, defective. The station's shut because the escalators don't work. You've got to maintain state of good repair on the existing assets first and foremost, keep it safe. But yeah, as Simon has said, there's logic behind how we then take you through it. Then we'd do this because there's compelling cases. It would be madness, my professional opinion, utter madness to put new trains on the pick and run them over fixed block signalling with train stops and tripcots and airlines. You've got to get to modern signalling, and then ultimately you get to the extensions, which are warranted, and they've got huge environmental and social benefits. So we've certainly constructed it so as not to look like a wish list. It absolutely isn't. It is, in our considered, measured, professional opinion, this is what needs to be done.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Let me go to questions. Nina first, and then Anne, please.
Oh, thank you for that further detail around it. And it isn't a wish list, and I would support your view that it is aligned with the other messages that I've been hearing broader from the government, that the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for DfT are really wanting to embrace the green economic recovery and enabling transport to be at the forefront of jobs and doing this to deliver the net zero ambition. So I was really pleased to see how strongly, as well as ensuring we future-proof our infrastructure as we have it today and to grow it, that we have upped the ambition. Hence my question earlier, because this approach really does highlight the UK potentially, with London acting as that pivotal point to become a leader and a champion. So on the buses side of things, no pun intended with the TV programme, the focus should be around establishing a centre in the UK for delivering that green agenda in the way that we as London can focus on that. My question is, I know this has been done in time for the CSR. I would like to then see how it is joined up with other cities' ambitions around a bus agenda too, and understanding that that platform across the UK of where London can really be a leader, and then also where we're supportive of other cities' agendas as well. That joined up thinking is what the UK public is looking for. So it's not London versus anywhere else, but it is that joined up piece. So I know it couldn't be included in here, but that's what I'm hoping for. We will see going forward, because electrification is one answer, but UK is a much varied landscape, as is the Greater London landscape too. And I heard hydrogen being mentioned, but then there's also how do we really show leadership for drop-in fuels to decarbonise now, and. So I'm really, really heartened. There's a lot more I could say, but I focused on the bus agenda as a pivotal point for London. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. It's very helpful. Anne, and then we'll go to Ben, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Couple of issues from me. Really thought this was a good product in terms of spelling out the case, not just for London, but for driving forward the UK economy, which I thought was really good. And also, I don't think I'm wrong in saying, Simon, that there is a precedent for a longer term financial settlement with TfL, because I seem to remember there was one in the early 2000s, which actually did allow you to actually push forward on what the programme of investment should be. So it's not a new idea in that sense. It's a very sensible idea, which actually we should be pursuing as far as possible. I'd also just like to make the comment and absolutely agree about, you know, the safer streets scene and that move, but of course there are less opportunities for revenue generation out of some of the modes that we are now investing in, and that does need to be recognised as part of the overall plan in taking this forward. So I think, you know, absolutely fully supportive, but gone are the days where we're just trying to push people onto the buses and the trains, because there is a wider issue about capacity. And I take heart that actually a lot of the investment that you're talking about is making much better use of our existing capacity and making that capacity better for the passengers. So in a sense, it's a better customer experience, but it does mean that it's not just the drive for revenue, and that needs to be recognised in any settlement. One specific question for me, and it's probably me just not understanding the figures, but it's the figure that you quote on almost, I think, the first page, page 4, where you're saying they need it needs an extra 750 million, and I didn't quite link that up with any other figure that's been mentioned. I'm just wondering if that's take it offline. Can someone just look at that before it goes in, that is the right figure? I'm sure there's a reason why it's that figure, but I'd just like some confidence that it is the right figure. Thank you.
So just to answer that very quickly, if I may, Chair, because it's a very specific point. At the point of writing this document, we had submitted, as we were required to do, a funding submission to the government on how the 1.1 billion could be funded. The GLA had offered to borrow 350 million, meaning that 750 million further funding was required. Since that time, our colleagues at the GLA have really stepped up and made a really compelling offer to government about how, with some further support from government, they could fund the lion's share of the 1.1 billion potentially. And I think, you know, that changes the nature of the discussion such that, as Claire said, we're hoping to get resolution on Crossrail funding as early as today. But that reflects the official submission we had of what London could afford to do compared to what we might need in grant funding for Crossrail.
So really that figure is a government funding requirement.
Yeah.
Okay, as long as we're just clear about that, it's a net figure in a sense. Thank you. That's it.
Well, hang on, is it a net figure? I'm not sure I'm clear on that.
It was the figure that we needed from government when we submitted the funding letter. Things have moved on, and the GLA are now offering a new way of funding it, where the government would need to provide some support and risk sharing over time to the GLA, but the GLA would be would be funding us for the lion's share of the 1.1 billion, and there's a residual element that we're looking for government to underpin.
But what you're trying to get over in that paragraph is what you're looking for from government. So it's not the additional funding required, it's the additional government funding required.
It was.
Yeah,
I'll explain in a bit later when we have the private funding discussion.
I'm happy, but if this is going in today, I don't.
It's already got it. Yeah.
Oh right. Okay. Yeah. Fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Simon, let's pick it up in part 2 because I'm not sure I'm particularly clear. I'm a bit confused.
No, I'm trying not to be fully clear for a reason I'll explain later.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I understand what you're getting at, Simon.
Yeah.
Okay, and smarter than I am, so I'd like to just make sure I understand it. Okay. All right. Moving on. Nina, you've still got your hand up, I can see. Ben, you've got your hand up, I believe.
It's a couple of small points, and kind of, I guess, observations. Firstly, one of the points that comes across, and in actual fact, Simon referenced this, is in saying that we're a complicated organisation. I do think it's important in terms of having a strong narrative here, because we need to do there needs to be some salesmanship when it comes to different stakeholders. And I don't know what the right phraseology is, but maybe the new TfL is all about being sustainable, and maybe it's about sustainability and simplification or something. But I just do think that we need to just find a simple way of explaining kind of what we're all about. And we are making a bit of a pivot now. And it seems to me that sustainability is much more on the agenda, which I welcome enormously. And it seems to be that simplification's on the agenda. But just as I guess as an observation, that it does sound awfully kind of complex and convoluted, because it is. I just think we need a simplifying narrative in terms of some salesmanship and helping people understand really what we're all about. And I also had just a reaction to Nina's point, which is one of the language we often use is about leading, and I quite like that. But when it comes to kind of the national agenda, essentially what Nina, I think you were referring to, is that it's about critical mass. There's only one transport authority in the UK that actually can provide critical mass. And we can. We've just got the scale and the mass to be able to do things and lead things, and get things done other people don't have. And I think in terms of providing that to a UK kind of ecosystem and viewing ourselves as a kind of a central pillar of an ecosystem, providing critical mass to that system might just be a different way of expressing the point. And because otherwise we talk about leading and driving and pioneering. And if I was in Manchester or Birmingham or somewhere else, that would kind of rather get on my nerves. So I guess just a couple of soft points, just a couple of reactions I had to the discussion, which I thought was a really good discussion. And I'm fully supportive of it.
Thank you. Andy, you got your hand up. I don't know if that's still there.
Yeah, no, it was only really by way of reaction. Well, first in reaction to Nina's point, no need to apologise for On the Buses, my friend, one of my favourite TV shows, and always will be. Ben, I think you make really good points about messaging is really important. And, we're not meaning to be, on the one hand, I don't think we for TfL as a microcosm, but also actually a very massive, integral, hugely important part of London. We shouldn't hide our light under a bushel. We shouldn't say, we shouldn't shy from saying that actually, guess what? We do drive the national economy, and without London's literally, I think something like £39 billion net we contribute to the exchequer. Without that, forget levelling up. It's just not going to happen. But equally, we mustn't be sort of arrogant about this. So we do get the point that actually a successful London can absolutely benefit the rest of the country, not in a sort of charitable way, but we do have the scale. I mean, there is no two ways about it. We have something like 29% of the bus fleet in the UK. So if we can use our critical mass to replace our bus system and to get on with it, that will benefit the likes of Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Sheffield, Plymouth, all these various places, which can then leverage off a very viable bus production line. And similarly, we are mindful of what's going on in other locations. Nina made that point. And I think back to my time at New York City Transit, where absolutely we were looking to electrify the bus fleet. So there's all sorts of stuff that we can do in cooperation to avoid, number one, wastefulness or duplication of effort, but number two, it gives you huge leverage again with the suppliers who might otherwise try picking you off and say, well, this is our price. Well, hang on a minute. We're now saying, as a collective of world cities, we want you to sharpen your pencil, and we expect you to do that. So absolutely, we'll get the messaging right. It's not meant to be arrogant, but equally, reality is, whether people like it, London is the economic engine of this country and will be for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Andy. Claire?
Thanks very much indeed. Just very briefly, I think it was Nina who was saying that there was in the past a long-term funding settlement for London, for TfL. That's absolutely true. When I joined the Department for Transport in 2009, there was a 10-year funding line that had been agreed for transport, and then within that there was a 10-year line for TfL, and it was, in many ways, it demonstrated two things. One was it's really, really useful to have a long-term funding line, and the second thing is that even long-term funding is vulnerable when the world gets turned upside down. At that stage, it was the financial crisis, and everything got swept away. I think the reality is that even if there were a long-term funding line in place, it probably would have been completely disrupted by COVID. So I think it is worth trying to think in those long terms, and I'm sure the Treasury will be trying to. Equally, I think it will be very difficult, and there is going to be huge competition for funding, particularly capital funding, which is really important to TfL. So I suppose from a kind of experience point of view, I think it's being able to demonstrate that you meet that everything that you're proposing is really very much in line with the government's priorities is necessary but not sufficient. Really, really important to do that. But there will be far more opportunities to invest within those priorities than there is cash available to do so. So having the really hard edge about benefit cost ratios and being able to demonstrate those hard economic benefits will be part of the debate as well.
Thanks, Claire. You're absolutely right. So London has had two goes at having a long-term funding settlement, and they did crucially enable both the Elizabeth Line Crossrail and the tube and overground upgrades to take place, and the expansion of the bus fleet. Even though those settlements changed over time, it allowed certainty to be given to the suppliers. So they really do provide benefit. The thing that Andy and I were really wanting to strive to get to is, we know our colleagues in Network Rail and Highways England benefit from that stability of planning, even if the money changes, through 5-year control periods. And as you know, DfT successfully made the case for a new framework for Highways England that gave them the certainty, because certainty does drive efficiency when it comes to infrastructure planning and delivery. And then on the final point about London and the rest of the UK, the thing that we've been talking to Treasury about, and unfortunately I'll be having a further discussion with them over the autumn, and the National Infrastructure Commission, is that transport is an ecosystem. It's not a discrete set of projects. You do have to think about, plan and deliver these as an ecosystem, and therefore it has to be London and the rest of the country within a framework the National Infrastructure Commission agree with the Treasury, rather than individual projects at the expense of other ones, is absolutely critical to get there.
Thank you all. Look, I think the only additional observation, I just want to latch on to Ben's, it is a very good paper, there's no question of it. The thing that doesn't come across in my mind is the complexity and the sophistication. We are an exceptionally confused, if you want to call it that, machine when you look at it outside in. We're an employer of 30,000 people plus across a number of disciplines. We're a regulator for the taxi and private hire sector. We've got a mandate for delivering significant investment to support the future growth and prosperity of London and the UK, to the point you just made. We've got commercial development function, and we're also an integrated transport authority. I just think that we should make sure that that's clear. Obviously, people touch it and understand it, but when these sort of papers are being done, I think to Claire's point, we've just got to make sure that the complexity of what we do and the interdependencies of all of those things is greater than the thing that most people see, which is essentially the lens as the carrier of people. So, no need to labour that point, but I think it's noteworthy in the context of what we're talking about. I'll leave that, Andy, with you and with Simon. So I want to bring it back to the agenda. We've had a good discussion on that. I think it's been really helpful. Thank you. We will note the paper as submitted. Howard, I think that's all we need to do for the purposes of today. And then what we'll do is let's move on the agenda, please, to agenda item 9, which is the prudential indicators outturn. Simon, are you introducing it and then inviting Rachel to come in?
Tony is going to lead and Rachel is going to support.
Okay, thank you. Tony, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So what I'll do is just summarise the paper, and this is the Prudential Indicator Review for the year ending 1920. So as a local authority, we're required by regulation to have regard to the Prudential Code, whose objective is to ensure capital expenditure and associating financing plans are affordable, prudent and sustainable. It's demonstrated by setting annual prudential indicators, tracking against them, and also in producing a long-term capital plan, which we do as part of our business plan process. The prudential indicators are both for TfL Group, so its entirety plus the corporation, and revolve around 4 key metrics, which is the operational boundary for external debt, which is our external debt plus capital long-term liabilities. The authorised limit for external debt adds in a level of contingency onto the operational boundary, and then I think capital expenditure is self-explanatory, and the ratio of financing costs to net revenue stream, again, probably self-explanatory. The most sensitive of these measures is the authorised limit for external debt, which is the only measure that has potential for attracting penalties for breach. These were set, and the measures that we have were set against accounting standards in place in 2019, when the indicators were presented and agreed by the board as part of the budget approval process for 1920. I'll come back to why that accounting standard is important next. So specifically, the measures were assessed under IAS 17, which is International Accounting Standard, and that relates to leases. And this has been in place for many years. When you look at Appendix 1, measures our performance, and it does this against both our IAS 17 measure, but also a new accounting standard that has come in and we've had authorization to use by SIPFA, IFRS 16. So when you look at the measures, the only measure that has not been met under IAS 17 is the ratio of financing costs to net revenue stream. The key reason for this relates to a couple of things. One is lower revenue, which was impacted to an extent by the fall off of revenue at the back end of the year to March 2020, and that was circa about 200 million. And a proportion of the budgeted grant income utilised to fund capital expenditure, therefore reducing revenue. It doesn't reflect an underlying increase in interest charges. So we understand what the drivers were, and we understand that the impacts of the two things actually are interrelated, because with less revenue, we had to use more grant funding to allocate to capital in some of our subsidiaries. So as I said, during the close of our financial accounts for 1920, CIPFA formally approved an amendment to the code for local authority accounting, which required TfL uniquely amongst local authorities to apply IFRS 16, the new accounting standard for leases applicable in the private sector, to our financial statements 1920. And this was due to the significant level of leases that TfL holds through its subsidiary undertakings. So, for example, the London Overground leases, but also the Elizabeth Line leases. For this reason, we have included in the indicators as illustrative the IFRS 16 numbers as well. Under the measures, long-term liabilities and financing costs are significantly higher. You can see the gross up of that due to the accounting treatment, which means the four measures are not achieved under this basis. Where this breaches the limits and indicators under IFRS 16 outturn are a direct cost of the change in accounting policy, rather than being a change in underlying performance or contractual arrangements. This is not considered a matter of concern. The last point that I'll note is our prudential indicators for 2021 will be under IFRS 16, and we'll plan to resubmit for approval later in the year as part of our business plan process, and they'll be reviewed by the Finance Committee, and we'll see the revised targets under IFRS 16 as part of the business plan process and approvals. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Tony. Very helpful. Any questions from the committee members? I always worry that members of the public are watching this stuff and kind of, think it's mumbo jumbo. Can you just, in a nutshell, just explain IFRS 16 for those who have a passion for understanding these things?
Sure. So IFRS 16 relates to how we treat long-term leases in our accounts, and effectively the move from IAS 17, so the old standard, to the new standard, brings in a lot larger number of leases to be on balance sheet, so recorded in our accounts rather than off balance sheet. And therefore, what that causes is a gross up of our balance sheet. So we have higher asset values to record the asset that we're utilising, but we also have higher liabilities. And it's that higher long-term liability that has driven the difference in the prudential indicators as part of the paper that you see in front of you. I hope that is simple enough.
I think the accounting profession will be proud of you, Anthony. Thank you. Okay, so we'll note the paper. Thank you. That's very helpful. Let's move on to Treasury activities, please. Again, Tony, are you leading on that one first, or is Simon and then bringing Joanne in?
So Joe and Paul and Alex from the Treasury team will run you briefly through this. So, this is our sort of normal reporting on Treasury. So what I will do is invite you to take the paper as read. And unless there's anything Joe or Alex or Paul want to specifically highlight from the first half of the year, I'll give them the opportunity to do that. I suggest we just move directly into questions in the interest of time.
I don't think I have anything specifically to highlight. I think the paper is pretty self-evident. I think it's an update on how we've been managing liquidity through this challenging coronavirus period by adjusting our cash balances accordingly. You'll note that we've been downgraded by a couple of the rating agencies. It's been called out earlier in the meeting. But I think other than that, it's pretty straightforward.
Joe, from your point of view, is there anything that we're doing differently in terms of policy and strategy as opposed to the way we have adopted this in previous years?
No, there isn't. We're still working within the Treasury policy, and we're completely compliant with all of the Treasury the Treasury management policy. So no, there isn't. We've just sort of really managed the shorter term liquidity so that we're operating more effectively and responding to the coronavirus issues. I mean, you know, we were planning to do a commercial bond issue around about the time in March, which we decided not to do and drew down on the PWLB to get quick liquidity. No.
I think the one thing just to add is that the framework hasn't changed, but the focus on that short-term cash forecasting has, with myself, Joe, Tony, and the team. First of all, more focused on it anyway, but also as part of the KPMG remit, the team periodically go through the cash forecast with KPMG in terms of demonstrating the need for the half one funding in order to maintain that minimum liquidity of 1.2 billion. So the practices around and the focus on it by the business in terms of improving the quality and consistency of the cash forecasting is where the focus has been, and it has improved significantly from the beginning of the financial year to now. Okay, Simon, thank you. Joe, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it. There is something for part two, which we will come back to. And then if there's anything relevant, I'll bring it back to this meeting. But on this basis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's move on to item 11, please, the TfL energy update. And again, there are some aspects in part two, but let's deal with the paper as we've got in part one. Lily, I think you may be on the line.
Yep.
And Jennifer as well. So I'm going to hand over to you, Lily.
Thanks, Ron. Good morning, everybody. Yes, so this is a paper in the context of planning for business as usual, obviously. And what we have here is a paper that's seeking approval for our strategy to transition TfL's electricity purchasing to renewable energy sources. You'll be obviously aware that we have goals around this set out in our Mayor's Transport Strategy and also the London Environment Strategy, particularly to run a zero carbon railway by 2030. But it's very much part of the green recovery that we've been talking about this morning, and about enabling the right kind of developments that help the country as a whole actually build back better. Over the last few months, we've been working very closely with consultants Baringa, also the Crown Commercial Services, external stakeholders such as the City of London and others who are farther ahead of us in this journey in terms of purchasing renewable energy, and undertaking market testing to really shape a strategy which should deliver financial savings for TfL, but also really significant carbon savings. And I sort of ask you to hold both of those in your mind as we look at the strategy. It matters because TfL is London's largest consumer of electricity. Every year we consume the same amount of electricity as a medium-sized city of about 500,000 people. So our transition to renewable energy will have a very tangible impact on reducing carbon emissions at a national level, actually. Currently, as the paper sets out, we work with the Crown Commercial Services, CCS, to purchase electricity on a 3-year rolling process through the wholesale market. That has its benefits, but it leaves us exposed to changes in the wholesale market. And the work we did with Baringa suggested that electricity prices would be increasing in future in that market. So the paper covers a lot of detail, but at its very heart, what it's talking about is agreeing longer term contracts with renewable energy suppliers for a variety of different assets. Those that exist already, such as existing wind farms, which would be called operational assets, or contracting to enable them to develop a new asset, a new solar farm, a new onshore wind farm, for example. That's what we call an additional PPA. And the contract would be longer for that, more like 15 years. And the third part of our strategy to reach that zero carbon would be to look to enter into some green tariff arrangement where you are buying certified green energy from a renewable energy supplier. Now that's available at the moment, but at a premium. So we're looking for that to become more flexible over time. The paper sets out a roadmap for this in diagram 2 on page 56, but essentially it shows it as an incremental progression of allowing procurement over, say, in tranches over 2 year periods, so that we would progress then to buy incrementally as the market evolves chunks of our electricity requirements. And I think that deliberation and taking time is important for all the reasons actually we've talked about this morning, to be able to flex to the actual demand that we have if service requirements should change, and also because the renewable energy market itself should and is evolving. And just on that last point, we undertook quite extensive market engagement over the summer with renewable energy suppliers and had interest from over 28 of them, and the teams have met and had detailed conversations with them. And I think that has really boosted our confidence in this space, that there are, through signing up to these longer contracts, some real potential financial savings to be made. And some of the detail is set out in the private section of the paper, and we can pick up questions on that later. But also that the suppliers were willing to consider a range of different contract types and look at a variety of arrangements, whether from fixed costs or index costs. So we have quite a lot of flexibility at our fingertips, really, to, I think, to get some good deals out of this, basically. So the strategy is set out. It outlines that we would be looking to go to market in the spring to look to take on around 150 gigawatts of medium-term assets. That's probably the existing operational assets, and another 150 gigawatts of longer-term assets on longer-term contracts, probably 15 years. That represents 20% of our total electricity consumption. And in that one move, actually, we would reduce our carbon emissions between 7 and 8%. So that was just year one of doing that procurement. The detail, as you've seen in the paper, still does need some finalisation. So the next meeting, the Finance Committee in November, is the one where we'd actually bring the procurement authority request. So we're not asking for procurement authority today, we're asking for agreement on this strategic approach. And I think with that, and with noting that I have Jenny Payne and Glenn Lenton on the call with me who can answer some of the more tricky questions, I'll stop talking. Thank you, Ron.
Lily, thank you. Very, very comprehensive. And thank you for the paper as well, which I thought was very informative, actually. I'm going to open it up to members in terms of questions that people will have. Nina, as expected, you'll be first. You're on mute, Nina.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. As you can understand, I'm really pleased that this paper's come to the Finance Committee, and the hard work that Lily and her team and her colleagues across TfL, and also broader in GLA, in helping increase the understanding of the opportunities that are making themselves available here. In conversations in the SSHR and with Kay, the chair, who I also know is on this listening in on this call, we have stepped through the important aspects of this. It's great that TfL are recognising this is a real opportunity to reduce costs, and I thank Simon and Andy, who I know will be a champion in this, and Heidi, that we should be able to progress on this. So I'm happy with this paper as it's been presented and supported. I think the question, and Lily knows I'm going to be saying this, there is, you know, the opportunity that we can do this as a wider London approach, and that we keep the opportunity about how do we leverage the benefits across the broader London portfolio in this approach, and the need maybe to accelerate it as we see as markets develop, because over the next 3 months we're going to hear an awful lot about what the government's planning to do with contracts for difference for renewable technologies, and also the fact that onshore renewable areas are really going to be getting a support from the government, from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So the framework's in place. I see this as the base case, the absolute lowest case for TfL. If we think about it, we can only improve our position from here of introducing and accelerating our interest in renewable technologies. And obviously the bus consideration that we heard in the CSR, and that ambition needs to be factored into that broader, bigger picture of how much renewable power we will be wanting to secure to fulfil both ambitions. So really good work. Keep it open for London. Base reference. We've got to accelerate it though. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. Thank you for the support as well. I know you've been very actively involved in the support in the background in this, so thank you for the work on that. I'm going to move across to Ben and then Anne, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit of a broken record on this one, in the sense that I work on this. My question would be, is it enough? I think we've been a bit of a laggard in this area. And when you say you have 28 people, you know, responding to an opportunity, that kind of speaks volumes to me. I know there's the devil's in the detail here, but I always felt we've been a bit of a laggard on this in this area. I think we should be more of a leader. I'm not sure this is enough. I'm not sure it's ambitious enough. I do think that there is a big pivot going on towards sustainability. I think COVID has accelerated that. So I think I welcome it and I support it. I'm not sure it's ambitious enough. I also think it's really important to keep working with the CCS as well, to kind of make sure to support them in terms of their sustainability agenda as a big component of that. And another issue, I'm afraid, people always roll their eyes when I mention this. I still think on just in terms of enabling other people to be green and sustainable as well when it comes to car usage. I know, again, it's complicated. I know you have to work with lots of boroughs. I know we produce this evidence demonstrating that we're really good at the provision of charging points across London. I still struggle with that, and I know a lot of. I loathe kind of anecdotal evidence because it's often the enemy of kind of reason and thought and fact. But anecdotally, so many people that I come across don't have an electric car because they can't charge it. And so I just feel that strategically, TfL is a laggard on sustainability, and it's been a constant frustration of mine. So I do support this. I think it's great. I think it's really welcome. I just wish we'd get much more of a move on. I think we could really make a difference. Sorry, no, I'm just frustrated. I always have been on this issue.
Ben, look, I think the point you raise isn't one we should just dismiss. And I know Andy is a massive supporter of this, and in fact Heidi as well, and Lily. So what I would suggest is that this isn't really the right forum for the strategic conversation, as you and I have discussed in the past. But if I can suggest to Howard that that is something that is considered and thought about by management, Andy, and the team, in terms of, so what else could we do and how could we accelerate? But more importantly, what the implications of that would be? Because this is a bit of a spaghetti complex situation in terms of dependencies and others. And we've talked about this at board as well, where not just the charging point, but just on the broader level. So I think it'd be worth, Andy, having a think about that and maybe coming back to one of the other forums to work out, well, what would the accelerator be? Not to say that we've got to do it, but actually the implications of that, because there's always it's about prioritization and capital.
Whoops, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to take up that challenge, and also Ben, I'd love to meet with you again, and we can go through some of that, because we're not trying to underplay our ambition here. We're trying to be kind of realistic, but equally, like you, I'd love to be a world leader on this. I think TfL should be a world leader, and certainly. One of the reasons we're so keen to secure the long-term financial sustainability of this organisation is so that we can embark upon more ambitious schemes, and we can certainly factor your expertise in, and I'd be happy to have a discussion offline with you.
Thanks, Andy. Nina, sounds like you just want to come in on that last point.
Yeah, again, this is a case where there's some really great structured conversations happening in other panels and committees, and that's why I did mention Kay, and Lily, we really put them through their paces in that panel, and unfortunately, if you're not present in it, you won't hear the detail that we do challenge, don't we, Lily? So, Ben, please do join. This is an energy paper, which is the power procurement paper. It's not the EV charging infrastructure, mixing it all up together. I think we really need to help get this away. And as I said, and I think Lily agrees with me, I'm going to put words into her and her team. This is the lowest case. We want to be able to see how we can build up on that and accelerate. And with the support from DFT, I'm sure we will be able to do that.
I think that's a fair kind of semi-rebuke, because you're right, I was straying beyond my confines, and so fair enough.
Okay.
Let's get a bit of passion once in a while.
Ron, I'll come back at the end on all the other comments. Yeah.
I'll bring you in, Lily. Look, Ben, I think knowing Nina as you do, as I do, this is not likely to be a subject that will be let off lightly by either Nina or by Kay in any of the subcommittees that are taking place. So I am actually, in fairness, quite reassured when Nina says that she thinks it's a good thing. It gives us some comfort, I think. Let me move on quickly to Anne on that basis.
Thank you. Please take what I'm about to say in the context that I fully support you trying to do this, but this is the Finance Committee. And what my eye has been drawn to in the paper are the accounting considerations. And I would like to understand the level of risk around trying to get this off balance sheet, particularly since we've seen what the consequence was of bringing all the leasing, which was previously off balance sheet, onto the balance sheet. So particularly since you seem to be dealing with two different standard frameworks. So could someone sort of elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, Simon, please. I was going to ask the same question. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So you're absolutely right, Anne, and let me first say that as some of you will know, I had my Damascene moment on this earlier this year when we brought a CO2 scorecard measure and a carbon reduction measure, because there are risks associated with this. There are a lot of risks around locking into long-term contracts, given no long-term certainty of funding. It's very difficult for me to authorise these things absent a long-term funding settlement. And also, given that our borrowing limits are so tightly governed by the Treasury, the risk here is that we enter into things for the right reasons. I absolutely support. They are a number of these contracts would be considered to be derivatives, and they would therefore count as borrowing under the public sector net debt calculations under ESA 2010, and therefore, if we only have X 100 million in old days, before when we could still afford to borrow to invest in infrastructure, having 20, 40, 50 million being sliced off that because we've entered into a long-term contract for power is a real risk, okay, that people need to understand. That said, I am fully supportive of this, and I've been working with Lily on this, so you have my full support in what we're trying to do here. The other risk is that, as we've seen with the demand shock of the size of COVID, we actually ended up needing 50% of the traction power we would normally use during the COVID period. So we're never going to be able to enter into 100% fixed long-term contracts, because what we've learned through COVID is we're going to have to maintain some operational flexibility around traction power. But this is the right thing to do. It runs with the investments we talked about earlier under the CSR agenda, that if we want the goal for TfL to be a carbon neutral mass public transport system, then we have to address the energy procurement side as well as the asset side.
That's really helpful, Simon. This is clearly not just going to affect us. So if the government is really keen on a green economy, I'm assuming as part of our strategy, we're trying to discuss this issue with the various accounting bodies and with the relevant people in government.
Yeah, we will be. It is a bit of a frustration, to be honest, at the moment around this accounting treatment, but we will continue trying to discuss it.
Okay, thanks.
Simon, I think it's an issue that we ought to just keep an eye on, and maybe just give us an update at the next meeting on this in terms of ongoing, because it is, the accounting issue was the one I was going to raise, but Anne's raised it. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Other hands, I can see Andy and Nina have still got their hands up. That might not be as needed. Okay, thank you. So I think on that paper, Lily, thank you very much for it. It is comprehensive. Look, I appreciate that this is in some ways pioneering for us in terms of what we're trying to do and moving forward, but an important issue for the future. So we will note the paper here. There is something on a supplementary aspect that we will look at in part 2, but we'll take it that the paper was read here and discussed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ron, and obviously happy to follow up with Ben and others on those conversations more generally on ambition and strategy going forward.
Yeah, sorry, Lily, I should have asked you. Was there anything you wanted to come back on in terms of any points?
Well, only more generally. I mean, Nina's right. This is the energy procurement paper, therefore it focuses on that. But there is a broader energy strategy, and it does include EV charging. And indeed, that CSR document that we were discussing earlier includes quite a strong pitch for more investment in EV. I don't think anyone thinks where we need to be with EV charging at the moment. But also, just to reassure Nina, this piece of work, it is about the base approach for TfL. There is wider work going on at the London level with the GLA about what would a bigger picture like? Could we go faster? Could we save even more money or deliver renewables even faster? But I just want to get this going now so that we can have some tangible change in delivery, and then we can bring incremental changes and improvements as we go forward.
Okay, thanks. Ben?
Yeah, just recovering my poise a bit after my strange flash of kind of passion, which is very rare. So perhaps everyone should just savour that. I'll try now to be a bit more moderate and thoughtful. I do think the reason why I do think this really matters is for finance, is because I think securing finance in the future in terms of borrowing, in terms of our credit ratings, in terms of any settlement with the government, I think this is going to become a key factor. I think it's going to become a key risk factor for finance. And I think it may come up on us and surprise us more quickly than we think. It was interesting, I was doing some analysis just with my Rolls-Royce hat. I mean, one thing you might be astounded to know is, I mean, unfortunately, Rolls-Royce's share price is at a kind of like 15-year low. BP's share price is at a 25-year low. And if you look at a company like Ørsted, used to be Danish oil and natural gas, used to be a company called Dong. Dong's market cap is now the same as BP's. And so I do think that we've just got, which is astounding, by the way, it's absolutely flabbergasting. And their main market is the UK. And so I just think with the finance hat and with the view to kind of long-term risks and to just acceptance to a license to operate in society more broadly, I do think we might find that we must make sure on the right side of the curve here, because we might be surprised by it. And so I do think that it matters for finance, it matters for group risk, as well as just more broadly for strategy and for doing what's right. So I just thought I'd mention that, because we need to keep an eye on it, Ron, on this committee as well. with that kind of lens, as well as, of course, a near-term lens about affordability and liabilities, etc.
Yeah, Ben, thanks. That's well made. Look, I don't think anyone would disagree that the future dependencies and components of sustainability, I'll call it in that way, are going to be a feature for so many aspects of the way business is done. Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Okay, let's move on, please, from that to item 12 on the agenda, which is members' suggestions for future discussions. Howard, is there anything from your point of view you want to highlight on that, please?
No, Chair. I mean, obviously, we've picked up on the actions and things from the meeting today, which we'll take forward. So this is just really an opportunity if members wanted to mention anything else that they'd like to have papers or information on going forward, apart from what's already on the forward plan.
Yeah, so we'll stick with the plan in terms of what there is. If there is anything, I'd suggest that people submit that to Howard offline, if that's okay for the, because let's just keep the meeting going. And then moving on, please, to any other business. I've not been made aware of any items of urgent business, but let me just pause and see if there's anything that anyone wants to raise by just raising their hand. Okay, thank you. And then the next meeting is scheduled to be 25th of November 2020 at 10 a.m. Look forward to that. Thank you very much. And I think at this stage, we're going to be moving to part 2 of the items which were talked about in the first section. So on that basis, the broadcast for the meeting is going to be ended, and the public and press will be excluded from that, understandably. And I'd ask members and staff to just ensure that these are key discussion items which will have implications in terms of competitiveness, etc. So there shouldn't be anybody else